When the famous General Wei returned after more than 10 years of victorious campaigns, the emperor granted him the privilege of choosing a husband for his only daughter, Yuren, from among the 11 princes. However, selecting a prince was not the issue. The real challenge lay in finding one willing to marry his stubborn, ill-mannered daughter, who behaved more like a warrior ready for battle than a royal bride. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "I need to sleep," he replied calmly. I told you that the rumors have died down. There is no need to sleep here anymore," she insisted. "I forgot," he said nonchalantly. "You don't forget," she snapped. "It's raining outside. I cannot go back to my private quarter," he explained. She didn't respond and, irritated, lay down and closed her eyes. Suddenly, she felt too strong. Arms grab her arm and thigh, pulling her to the side of the bed as he lay down beside her. "You dare touch me?" she exclaimed. "I've been touching you since last night, and you said I could sleep here." "Last night," he replied. "Touching me? Since when this prince became a pervert? You cannot sleep in my bed anymore," she shouted, almost hysterical. The prince didn't budge and pretended to be asleep. She tried to push him away, but he was too heavy for her. It had been nearly 2 seasons since she last trained. "Zihan," she called out in frustration. He didn't respond. Exasperated, she lay down and forced herself to sleep. It was now fall. Standing in front of the large wooden gate of the Wu estate was Wu Yuren. The cold wind of the season blew through her straight hair, which was neatly resting on her back with half braids tied in a bun. Her dress was shorter and dyed a darker color than the traditional attire, revealing shoes that almost reached her knees. A warrior. Despite her straight posture and serious expression reminiscent of one of the general's warriors, Yuren was emotional. She stood almost on the verge of tears as she waited with her mother and 2 older cousins, Jin and Fang, for the arrival of the famous General Wu. The message announcing the general's return and the victory of the last war had arrived at their estate a week prior. Her mother had cried tears of joy upon hearing the news, and had instructed all the servants to clean the entire estate and gather various ingredients for the feast. The Wu mansion, which had been peaceful and quiet for nearly 4 summers, was now bustling with activity. Yuren couldn't help but feel both joyous and thankful. Despite the general's numerous missions and his rare visits to the estate, 4 summers was the longest time she had gone without seeing him. For almost 2 summers there had been no letters or signs of the general, so the old parchment announcing his arrival had eased her worries. "Father," she whispered into the wind. She saw a group of men approaching along the streets of the capital. The crowd cried out in joy and praised him as he rode at the front, smiling in their direction. A white cloth was wrapped around his left arm despite the heavy armor he wore. Yuren knew that beneath that armor lay more injuries and scars, but his face conveyed a different story. "Lang!" her mother called, almost running towards the general. The general dismounted his horse and embraced his wife, joy in his eyes. Young Yuren could not help but run towards them and hug her father as well. "My daughter, you've grown," he said, as she hid her face with her hands while crying. She missed his voice and warmth. She wondered how the general, a man who had won so many battles and slain countless enemies, could also be the same man who always spoke so gently to her and her mother. "Do not worry anymore, Lin. I am here now," he said, hugging her crying mother once more. "I am sorry. I am just so glad," her mother said. The general chuckled softly. After exchanging greetings with his soldiers and commander, they all went inside the estate for the feast. Her mother knew that the troops had already been treated to a feast at the palace, so most of the food on the table consisted of different kinds of fruits and desserts. The soldiers were pleased and thanked the general's wife for the delicate patterns and sweet flavors of the food they had been longing for. As dinner came to an end, the joyous atmosphere of the feast gave way to a quieter, more intimate dinner for the Wu family. The soldiers had said their goodbyes, and departed to reunite with their families in the capital, while some had already fallen asleep, in the quarters provided for them by the general. And how long will it last? The general asked his nephew, Wu Jin, about the academy. The news of Jin's qualifications for the academy had arrived a month before the general's return, bringing great joy to the Wu family. We are allowed to visit every year, uncle. Every summer. To be exact, Jin said. That is great. And when will the academy start? Before fall, uncle, Jin replied, continuing to eat. I see. It's a shame you will miss your cousin's wedding, the general said, taking a sip of his drink. Everyone at the table paused and looked at the general, who was now lost in thought. Fang laughed nervously. Uncle, I will not be wed. You must be mistaken. It's your Mei Fang, the general said, and the young girl, who had been quietly eating, froze, her head whipped around to look at her father, her eyes wide with shock. Her father must be joking. Although she was nearly 20, the right age for marriage, she was a warrior rather than a traditional young lady. Instead of teacups and painting, fans, she preferred swords and arrows. Her days were spent hunting small animals in the forest and sparring with trainees. No one in the capital would ask for her hand, let alone request it from the general. A banquet for the emperor's birthday will be held within a week. This family is honored to be part of it, the general continued. Yurin clenched her chopsticks and lowered her gaze to her food. She had known that this day would come her chance to be a wife and perhaps have a child, but she never expected to marry into a high family. The atmosphere at the table grew somber as everyone absorbed the news. Eventually the meal ended, and everyone retired to their private rooms. Yurin, however, was summoned by the general to his library. With a shaky voice, she announced her arrival. Father, you called for me? She bit her lower lip nervously. Come in, my daughter, he said, his usually peaceful face adorned with a small smile. Have a seat. We have something to discuss, he said, gesturing to a chair in front of him. Yurin took her seat. Child, do you hate your father? He asked, taking her hand and looking at her with concern. No, she could never hate her father. I am here to accept His Highness's blessing, she said, recognizing that marriage into a high family would elevate her status and allow her father to stay in the capital and retire. Her father smiled. It is always your choice, my child. Your father only wants you to be happy, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Yuren thanks her father, she said. His Highness wishes to inform you that you are free to choose from his sons. You will also be given a title. I will thank His Majesty, Yuren said, and the general embraced his daughter before dismissing her. In the banquet. Extravagant. The only word that came to Yuren's mind as she looked in the decorations and the attendees. At the center of it all, between her parents, she can see the Emperor and Empress, dressed in gold and red. Joy and satisfaction were evident on their faces despite their composed demeanor. General Wu Ling and his family greet the Emperor. The 5 of them, including Yuren's cousins, bowed to His Highness. General, I am glad you came, said the Emperor, stepping closer to them. This general would not miss His Highness's banquet for the world, the general replied. The Emperor laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. Is this your daughter? What a lovely young lady, the Emperor said, and Yuren froze. She did not dare to look up at the Emperor, and instead kept her head bowed as she greeted him. Wu Yuren greets the Emperor and Empress, she said, her head still lowered. Wu Yuren, lift your head so I can see your face, the Empress said. Yuren lifted her head, meeting the Empress's gaze. Despite the green and white dress tailored to accentuate her tall posture and the elaborate makeup that people admired, Yuren felt insecure in front of the royals. It had been a long time since she had worn such attire. I see the rumors are just rumors. This young lady looks lovely, the Empress said, her smile wide. Yuren bit the inside of her cheek, unsure how to respond to the compliment and the mention of rumors. "Oh, please excuse my rudeness. I am glad to welcome you to the family, young lady," the Empress said, smiling broadly. Yuren did not like that smile at all. "I have a special gift for the general's daughter," the Empress said, as a palace maid approached with a small chest in her hands. The Empress selected a green hairpin from inside. The pin was simple yet beautiful, crafted from silver, and jade into a design resembling leaves. "Wu Yuren thanks the Empress and Emperor for the gift," Yuren said, bowing her head and accepting the ornament. The family then took their seats at the banquet table, and the servants served drinks and treats before the live performance began, Yuren watched the performances. She remembered her father's words from that night. She would have the opportunity to choose a prince for her future. The thought of being connected to the royals was overwhelming, and she still did not know whom she would choose. "I am a friend to some of the princes if you need any advice," her cousin Fang said after clearing his throat. Yuren did not respond, instead taking a bite of her mooncake. "The general asked me to help you choose a husband. He knows you're not very fond of the women in the capital, so he asked for my assistance," Fang continued. Though she was reluctant, this was her only chance to observe the princes. "Tell me, what are the 7th prince's hobbies?" she asked. Fang smirked. "Women." Yuren's forehead creased. "Women?" Fang sipped his tea and glanced at the royals. "I used to train with the 6th and 7th princes, who are close to our age. The 7th prince's estate has no wife but many concubines. He spends most of his time at his estate, indulging in pleasures." Yuren looked at her cousin, shocked. "And who is the 7th prince?" "There, seated on the left side of the emperor, wearing the green coat, that's the 7th prince. You would be his wife if you choose him. Beside him is the 6th prince," Fang explained. Yuren looked at the 7th prince, who was smirking and laughing while talking to the man beside him. She turned her attention to the 6th prince, who seemed to be genuinely in love with a woman in next to him, undoubtedly his wife. The 6th prince has a wife and a child. I am not sure how many concubines he took in, but he is known as a skilled artist and poet, Fang added. Yuren crossed out both princes from her options. The 7th prince's demeanor was unappealing, and the 6th prince seemed to be happily married. "Is that all you have to tell me?" she asked, her frustration evident. Fang chuckled. "In my opinion, the only princes worth considering are the 6th and 7th. The crown prince has many concubines and wives, and as well as the 2nd prince that lives far from the capital. The princes younger than the 6th are still too young. What about the 3rd and 4th princes? What about the 5th? Yuren asked. "Oh, right, the 5th prince is an idiot that only knows to drink and smoke, and the rest don't know much about them, so I can only advise you on those two," Fang said. Yuren took another bite of her mooncake, feeling stressed by her cousin's limited advice. She needed someone who knew more about the princes. Throughout the celebration, filled with performances and music, Yuren remained lost in thought about the princes. Her mother had already asked her twice if she was okay, and she simply smiled. "It's the fire dragon," Fang said, standing up to watch the fire-breathing dragon performance. Yuren was amazed. This was the first time she had seen such a spectacle. The crowd cheered, and many stood up to get a closer look. As her eyes wandered, she noticed a man seated at the lowermost left from the emperor's seat. He was the only prince wearing a black robe, resting his head on hand, his gaze fixed on the dancing dragon. As she observed him, their eyes met briefly, and she quickly looked away, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "You're considering the 4th prince, aren't you?" A voice startled her. "Shin, you scared me!" she exclaimed. Shin, her cousin, chuckled. "Do not look at the 4th prince. He should be the last on your list of suitors." Yuren did as she was told and turned her attention back to her cousin. "She didn't even know that he's the 4th prince. I trained with him, just as Fang trained with the 6th and 7th princes. The 4th prince does not want a wife," Shin said. Where did you hear that? Yurin asked. From him, the fourth prince, Zihan himself. Over the span of a month, Yurin's wardrobe and chambers transformed from a simple four-walled room into a grand space overflowing with clothes, jewels, and various other items. The royal family, as always, was extravagant. Though Yuren had not yet chosen a husband, it felt like she was being prepared with a dowry. My chamber has never felt so small before, she remarked. You, her personal maid, chuckled. Do you think the red dresses and jewels suit me more, you? Yurin asked, trying on a red skirt that trailed to the floor, something she usually did not wear. Red always suits you, miss, you replied, glancing at the skirt. Yurin agreed. The color red looked good against her skin and made her feel more confident. But don't you think I should wear paler colors? Yurin asked. When did you start caring about others' opinions, miss? You inquired. You must be mistaken, you. I am perfect the way I am, she lied. The truth was she had begun observing the ladies in the capital more closely. They were delicate and graceful, like white swans in a lake. Their demeanor, walk, and speech were filled with gentleness, while she felt like a soldier who had come down from the mountains, unprepared to court a prince. If the miss say so, Yu said, smiling. A sigh escaped Yurin's lips hearing her maid's words. Yu was right. She didn't care what other people thought before. That afternoon, Yurin chose to be alone and read inside the forest next to their estate, instead of hunting and practicing her archery. All the events happening around her were suffocating, and this was her only way to breathe and escape them. As night fell, Yurin noticed soldiers standing outside her estate. The guards did not react to her presence, yet their eyes were observant. Her forehead creased. Where are our former guards? And why are there so many? Miss, she heard the head servant call, rushing toward her. Quick, you need to change. You have visitors. The head servant hurriedly took her to her chamber and helped her change. I will be back, the head servant said, leaving the room. Who are the visitors? Yurin asked as some maids tied her skirt. 2 men dressed in fancy clothes. It seems the general and your cousins know them, a servant replied. Moments later, the head servant returned with an indescribable expression on her face. Someone needs to change the color of the young lady's dress, the head servant exclaimed, eyeing the ginger-colored skirt. Who are these people? And why does she need to change from her usual clothes just to see them? No, I do not wish to change my dress, Yurin said firmly. Although the dress she wore was simple, it was still a little extra compared to her daily attire, plus it was a long skirt. Her visitors must be important if she wore this just because they visited their estate. The head servant looked at her, then instructed the maids to tie up half of her hair. Her face was also touched by light makeup, making her expression more refined. At the dining table of Wu Estate, the 2 princes, Quan and Shi, were in a joyous conversation with Wu Fang. Xin was also in the room, peacefully listening to their conversation. They intended to visit their old friend Fang, who was always busy training and studying for the upcoming exam for scholars. Quan, the 5th prince wearing a white aristocrat's coat and sitting beside Wu Fang, spoke. Wu Fang, if you have some time. Later, let us go somewhere joyous, then laughed. Fang already knew he was referring to the pleasure house. Quan, you never change, Fang said and chuckled. If the general were here, he'd ban you from this estate. Shar, the 7th prince, said, taking a sip of his tea. He had a usual smirk on his face, as if he was planning something cunning every time. I do not want to get on the general's bad side, but... Quan looked to his left and right while getting closer to Shai. It's a shame he's not here. Quan smirked, and she just shook his head. After a moment, the general came together with his wife. Shai expected his daughter to be with them, but instead, it was the servants who gathered and started to clean the table. The 7th prince was getting impatient. He'd been waiting for the general's daughter since he stepped foot on this estate. There were many rumors circulating the empire about the daughter being a she-male, always dressed in male-like clothing, always with her father's soldiers, and overall looking like a boy. Yet, what he had seen from the banquet was the opposite. Maybe the Wu family did not mind the eyes, but the whole banquet was eyeing his family, especially his daughter, always between her two cousins towering over her and not letting everyone see her fully. Yet, by the time she greeted the queen, she was in front, and all the people had their eyes on her. Unlike the ladies of the capital, she moved confidently as if she was not afraid to take up space. Her fine movements were not like any delicate lady, but as if she was an assassin, calculated and calm so as her face. Calm yet intimidating. The lady was nothing like the beauty of any noble family. The general's daughter was more like something you wouldn't handle with care because it was something out of everyone's reach. That was the seventh prince's impression the first time he saw her at the banquet. Yet he was a prince. He promised himself that the second time he saw her, he would ask for her hand. "Oh, she's here," Fang said. Yuren entered the door with her usual bored look. She immediately spotted two familiar men sitting beside her cousin Fang. As soon as they stood up, she bowed her head as a sign of respect. These men looked so familiar, but she forgot where she had seen them. Were they one of her father's commanders? It couldn't be. They looked like aristocrats. "Daughter, take your seat," Yuren's mother said. She sat beside her mother, next to Shin, in front of this guy who looked at her with a smirk. She did not like that look. "This is the fifth prince, Quan, and the seventh prince, Shai," her mother said, and now she remembered. She had seen them at the banquet. "Wu Yuren greets the fifth and seventh prince," she said, hiding her expression of shock. "Two princes inside their home at this hour?" "It is nice to meet you, my lady," Quan stated. Yuren thought the prince just wanted to compliment her because she's the general's daughter, unlike this prince in front of her. The seventh prince continued to stare with a smirk on his face. "Wu Yuren is glad as well," she said, looking at the fifth prince, keeping her words short. The servants started to place trays of different foods on their table. Yuren remained quiet and started eating even before the general picked up his chopsticks. All throughout the dinner, politics and military were the only topics that floated through the air. Some of it interested her, leading her to give a brief opinion. This somehow made the princes freeze, unlike the other people in the dining room who were always hearing her political opinion. She had always been a good tactician. At least she considered herself one. Although she had never been in a battle, all was familiar to her. After all, she is the general's daughter. The dinner ended with the prince having a few drinks with her cousins until they departed the Wu estate. But before they left, the seventh prince faced her beside her father. "Major General, it would be an honor to have a private walk with Miss Wu tomorrow." She felt a shiver run down her spine. From that moment, she knew what the prince intended by coming to their estate. Her father looked at her, waiting for her answer. A cunning thought went through her head. She wanted to see how long that smirk would stay on his lips. "I apologize. Will Yuren have something to do tomorrow?" she said. The prince's smirk was erased from his lips, and the echo of the fifth prince's laugh was heard all over the estate. It was only him who was laughing, while the other people who heard the daughter's response were shocked. The daughter of the general rejected the seventh prince. That night in the library. Mei, do you not like the seventh prince? He is unwed and looking for a wife," Fang stated, almost getting impatient. He still could not believe what happened earlier. Yuren rejected Shi Li Shizuo, the seventh prince, part of the royal family. "I do not like the smirk on his face," she said honestly. "What do you mean? He is a royal. You could have at least accepted and rejected him in private," he said. She was expected to do that, however her stubbornness got the better of her. "Clearly, the seventh prince took affection to you. The only prince who is unwed," he said. "He still has dozens of concubines. That does not make him any better," she said, her voice getting louder. I do not care if he does not have a wife. I do not care if he's a royal. I just do not like the look on his face, she said, her voice firm as if she held authority. It was not the first time she had fought with her Mingay because of her stubbornness. Fang, quite angry with the way she was acting, went out to get some fresh air from his spoiled sister. Her narcissistic tendencies got the better of her tonight. He was only trying to help her. On the other hand, Yurin got out of the library still furious. In the hallways of her quarters, Shin stood just beside the door. She was about to walk past him when he spoke. Fang was only trying to help Mei Mei, he said. He's not helping. He invited the princes, especially the unwed seventh, for you to know them more. He's only trying to help this family, especially your mother, not to worry whenever the general goes to war. That made her stop. To be wed to a prince means higher status for this family. Your father could retire, Shin said calmly and tapped her shoulder. You always say I am much better than Fang when he was the one who's always taking care of you, Shin said, and was about to leave. You're wrong. The seventh prince isn't the only one who does not have a wife. He stopped in his tracks and looked at her. All he could do was follow her every move, when instead of going inside her chambers, she walked past him again and left. Before him. He smiled. A wedding will be held soon. It was an impulse. Yurin did not intend to tell her father that she wanted to marry the fourth prince. She did it impulsively. Her desire to prove herself to her two cousins led her to choose a prince that no one knew about. She really was stubborn. And she wanted to hit herself with a wooden sword for it. It had been weeks since she went to her parents' chambers and announced the prince she chose. There was no joy in their eyes, only confusion and doubt. For a second, Yurin did not hesitate and showed them desperation. But the morning she woke up, she realized how foolish she had been. Is father home? Yurin asked when Yu appeared. She had ordered that all her maids and soldiers must be at least 5 meters away from her while she read in the forest, and could only disturb her if the intent was to announce her father's return from the palace. Yes, Miss, Yu replied, prompting Yurin to pack her books immediately. Her father had been away for almost 2 days. Another war must be approaching, and as a major general, her father was increasingly busy. Where have you been, Yurin? Her father asked as soon as she stepped into the dining room. Both of her parents were almost done eating. Sorry to disturb your afternoon meal, mother and father, she said. You will not be allowed to do the same when you are a wife of a prince, Yurin, her mother remarked. Bitterness filled Yurin's mouth at her mother's comment. As the wedding approached, which was in a month, Wu Lin, her mother, had become stricter than ever about her etiquette and movements. She even took classes for it, although she could have easily taught herself through books and illustrations. Yurin's eyes were on the floor as she approached her seat beside her father. The servant quickly placed lotus soup and barbecue buns in front of her. Father, will the Emperor send you away again? Yurin asked, feeling hopeless. No, my child. I went to the palace because of some matters regarding the trainees, and your wedding, her father said. Yurin stared at him. I do not know how much has changed while I was away. First, you chose the fourth prince, which none of your cousins supported. Second, the fourth prince agreed to the arrangement. Yurin's eyes widened. His agreement didn't matter because it was the Emperor's order. But still, he agreed. The famous fourth prince, who lived farthest from the palace and had not taken a wife nor any concubines, agreed. These young ones are truly unpredictable, her father said. The wedding day, Yurin did not sleep the night before her wedding. She kept twisting and turning in her bed, admiring the unfamiliar yet sophisticated room given to her in the palace, and reassuring herself that everything would be fine. For the past month, all she did was act like a wife and learn how to please her husband. She hadn't even held or seen a wooden stick used for sparring, only books and constant lessons from her teacher and her mother. She felt sad, knowing her mother would now be alone without her. Urine was a little late to the ceremony because she accidentally fell asleep while waiting. When she was woken up, she was shocked to see almost 10 servants kneeling behind her chamber door, crying and begging for her to come out. Why didn't they just come in and wake her up? Her cheeks turned red with shame as she entered the hall for the ceremony, where everyone was ready, and she seemed like the last one to arrive. She avoided eye contact with her husband throughout the ceremony, until they bowed to each other. A shiver ran down her spine when she looked into his black eyes, which seemed like endless darkness. His face and eyes showed nothing, yet they were still intimidating. She hated feeling intimidated. Urine pretended to act calm and collected next to him, even after the ceremony ended and the feast began. They were the center of attention, or rather, she was. All the princes, princesses, their wives, and husbands looked at her like she was some kind of painting, invisibly observing her. This princess wishes a long and healthy life for the wife. And fourth brother. A woman in a bright rose-colored dress approached her and handed her a red envelope. Urine forced a smile and accepted the gift. Wu Yuren will treasure the gift from the princess, she said, expecting her to return to her seat. But the princess just looked at her and the gift in her hand. After a moment, Urine finally understood and opened the envelope. The princess squealed with happiness when Urine revealed the gift, an amber bracelet with a flower pendant, similar to the one the prince had given her as dowry. This is one of a kind, Wu Yuren. It was made from a unique gemstone found in a much warmer land to the east, the princess remarked, then grabbed the bracelet and put it on her. Wu Yuren thanks the princess, she replied, receiving a hug from the princess. The princess continued talking until someone cleared his throat, interrupting her. The princess made a smug face and returned to her seat. The 5th, 6th, and 7th princes approached, all smiling and holding their gifts. This 5th prince congratulates Urine and the 4th brother, the 5th prince said. Urine smiled at him. He seemed happier than the last time she saw him. She accepted a red box from him and thanked him. Congratulations to my favorite brother and his lovely wife, the 6th prince said. Urine couldn't help but admire his face for a moment. The rumors were true. The 6th prince was very charismatic and seemed like a good person with his warm smile and unproblematic aura. Thank you. A brief statement was heard from Urine's husband. This time, he was the one who received the gift. Urine couldn't help but look at her husband's face. He was serious, but his eyes seemed to smile at the 6th prince. It appeared that he was closest to the 6th prince. When the 4th prince was about to look at her, she immediately withdrew her gaze and looked at the prince in front of them. The 7th prince, with that smirk on his lips again. So that's why you rejected me. You fancy the 4th brother. Urine was shocked and felt a lump in her throat. She did not fancy any of the princes. She wanted to explain, but it was no use. She was the one who chose the 4th prince, so of course they would assume that. Wu Yuren, you are truly one of a kind, he said, placing a small white box in her hand before leaving. She stared at the small white box in her hand. The 7th prince was one of a kind as well. She slowly opened the white box, revealing a hairpin, a fiery red pin made with a red crystal. It was unusual because crystals were usually used as designs, but in this case, silver was the design. She lifted it to take a closer look until she felt a gaze upon her. She looked at the 4th prince, who was gazing at her, his head supported by his hand leaning on the armchair. He was just looking at her with an indescribable emotion. She cleared her throat and hid the pin inside its box, placing it with the other gifts. Do you fancy the 7th brother? These were the first words. No, the very first sound he made since she met him. His voice was deep and very manly, adding an extra layer of intimidation. She cleared her throat and said, I do not. So it is true that you fancy me? She kept her mouth shut at that remark. What was she supposed to say? How could she explain why she chose him and not his other brothers? The feast ended with a brief speech from the emperor. Joy was evident on his face, and he seemed genuinely happy that the fourth prince had finally taken a wife, according to his speech. Yurin immediately found her chamber and started to remove her hairpins and accessories alone. All the gifts were already inside her chamber, so she started looking at the white pin the seventh prince had given her. She found the pin unusually beautiful and wanted to stare at it a little longer. But when she looked at all the gifts, one by one, the white box was nowhere to be found. Yurin could not find the white box and was startled when the doors of her room opened. Her head whipped around to see the late-night intruder, and she was taken aback by his identity. She immediately looked away when he sat at the table and began pouring tea as if she weren't there. He was still in his wedding robes, reading a parchment, with a furrowed brow that suggested he wanted to tear the paper apart. Yurin couldn't help but stare at him. His movements were calm and calculated, yet the atmosphere around him was firm and mysterious. His presence commanded attention the moment he entered the room silently. Despite everything, the fourth prince was undeniably handsome. He inherited the emperor's build and height, but his other features, his tall nose, plump pink lips, and thick eyebrows were presumably from his mother. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the paper. She quickly averted her gaze, pretending to examine the gifts to hide her flushed face. Never before had she felt this kind of intimidation from someone. She couldn't even speak to him. Normally, unlike with the emperor and empress, he was truly difficult to deal with. For the first time, Yurin, daughter of a major general, was at a loss for words. It was unacceptable. After a moment, Yurin cleared her throat and asked the obvious. "Is this all of the gifts from your family?" "I am not sure. The maids brought them here," he replied without looking at her. Of course, the maids brought the gifts. What was she thinking? She thought to herself. Maybe she would just ask them if they saw a white box tomorrow. "Why? Is something missing, particularly a gift that you like?" he asked, finally looking at her. His eyes stayed on her, waiting for an answer. She pursed her lips and shook her head. "No, I think I just misplaced something inside one of the gift boxes," she lied. "Do you want me to look for it for you?" He offered, his voice serious and earnest. She shook her head violently and stood up. No need. I'll just look for it tomorrow," she said, walking towards the bathtub and combing her hair with her fingers to hide her nervousness. Inside the bathtub, where she changed into plain inner clothes after a brief bath, she paced back and forth. She hadn't realized earlier that they were supposed to consummate their marriage on their wedding night, and that made her nervous. She remembered the brief discussion before the wedding. Let the husband do whatever he wants and have a warm bath. The next morning, that was all she knew, but still, she was restless and chewing her thumb. Suddenly, there was a knock on the bathroom door that startled her, almost making her lose her balance. "I am needed in the main hall for a moment. I hope Yurin is not offended by my sudden departure," he said. Her eyes widened, and a sigh of relief escaped her. Why would she be offended? She was rather pleased. She cleared her throat and said, "Do what you must." And that was it. After that brief conversation, the wedding night was over. She slept comfortably in the large bed after washing her face, and that was it. That was how the wedding night ended. Yurin woke up late. The drapes were still in place, and everything in the room remained undisturbed. Her servants did not dare to enter, unlike at her father's estate. Instead, they remained outside. Yurin knew this because they were loudly whispering. "The prince left in the middle of the night," she overheard. "That is impossible. The chamber is still dark. They must be sleeping from their night activities," another servant argued. Yurin's forehead creased. "No, I am telling you. He left her. It's already the talk around the palace. Even Imperial Consort Lucy commented on it herself." Maybe they did it before the prince left, the other maid speculated. Urin's expression turned serious, and she opened the door harshly, causing the 3 servants to pale with nervousness. All 3 knelt almost in tears. "Please forgive us." "Fourth princess," they said in unison. Urin looked at them impassively, and then searched for her personal servant, Yu. "Where is my personal maid?" she asked in a firm voice. The maids grew even paler at the icy tone. "The Mamis's personal maid was summoned by Imperial Imperil Consort Xiao." "What?" Her voice rose. "Fill the tub with warm water and prepare my dress," she ordered. Urin knew she had overslept, so she asked the servants to hurry and help her. Get dressed. It was time for her to visit the prince's family after their wedding night, and unfortunately, the prince had been adopted by the empress when his biological mother died, so she had to look her best. "I'll wear this pin," she said, handing the hairdresser the hairpin given to her by the empress. Wearing a pale green dress and her hair half-tied with various pins, she hurriedly walked, almost ran, to the empress's estate, her servants pleading with her to slow down. Leaving the palace's east wing, she asked a servant to lead the way and had to stop and act normal whenever she saw concubines and high officials walking. One greeted her, and she politely returned the greeting. Many eyes darted her way, causing her insides to churn. She didn't know what to feel. Panting, she reached the empress's estate, where the 4th prince was already waiting. She shot him an angry gaze while catching her breath, and he stood there, emotionless. Her blood boiled. At this moment, she was more irritated with the 4th prince than with the smirk of the 7th prince the other day. "You left knowing we would be the talk of the palace the next morning," she said, her tone almost calm but tinged with anger. Her tone was nearly angry. Urin held her chest and tried to calm her breathing. 4th Prince Li Zihan and his wife Wu Yurin have arrived. "My apologies, but I thought you agreed for me to leave." Urin glared at him, ready to attack. "I did not know it would turn out like this," she whispered as they walked through the halls of the Empress's quarters. The 4th Prince remained silent as the door opened, revealing the Empress waiting for them. They took their seats after greeting her. Much like her servants' expressions, the Empress looked at her with pity, which was evident in her gentle words and actions. She even held Urin's hand and handed her a tea that, according to her, would make her calmer and more patient. When did tea make a person patient? Urin wondered. "My personal doctor will stay in your estate for some time. I hope you welcome her," the Empress said. She signaled her servant to open the door, and a middle-aged woman with a strict demeanor stepped in. "This daughter thanks Her Majesty for the doctor," Urin said, unsure of what else to say. They both left the Empress's estate with the doctor in tow, and Urin's emotions changed. She remembered what he had done to her the previous night. "If you'll excuse me, I am needed." Urin cut him off. "I need to talk to you privately," she said coldly. Her posture and face screamed authority, and her voice almost gave the servants chills. The prince, however, was not intimidated. He looked intently at his new wife until the doctor cleared her throat. They both glanced at her, but quickly returned their attention to each other. "We'll have a talk in my private quarters." It was a terrifying morning for all the servants and soldiers. The soldiers were exhausted, having stayed up all night as the 4th Prince dealt with the news that the border near his estate had been raided. They were summoned by the commander and asked to return to the 4th Prince's estate, then summoned again by the prince, who had a serious talk with the emperor. The new wife's anger was palpable. Her posture, almost reaching the prince's chin, and her authoritative demeanor left no doubt she was the major general's daughter. On the other hand, the maids wished they could cover their ears to avoid hearing the couple's argument. The new master's beautiful face was completely masked by irritation and anger. She ordered them to hurry all morning, and now they had to endure the clash of an icy demeanor and an angry lioness. This young lady was indeed the Major General Wu's daughter. All was quiet as they followed the prince and his wife, eyes downcast. No one dared to speak or move when the prince dismissed his soldiers, leaving only the servants to feel the tense atmosphere. "Stay here," the prince commanded as they reached the gates of their quarters in the palace. His wife kept her gaze averted and continued inside, with the prince following behind. "We are unfortunate. The princess is such a vile and ill-mannered lady," one of the new maids whispered to the others. "You shouldn't say such things. If someone hears you and tells the princess, she might kill you herself," another spat back. "I wish I'd been assigned to the sixth master. I heard his wife is like a walking piece of wood. Rarely speaks or does anything," another maid remarked, shocking her colleagues with her bluntness. "It was the night I intend to discuss. People in the palace were talking about your departure," Yurin said, her eyes burning with anger as she looked at the prince. The prince sighed and took a seat, not even bothering to offer her one. "I recall that you were okay with me leaving," Yurin continued, her fists clenched. "Big brother, your new wife is not accustomed to the palace's scrutiny. But you are," she thought, worried about what others would say about her family outside. The palace. The prince remained silent, his expression emotionless, but Yurin could sense his growing irritation, and that was precisely her plan. Regardless of whether it was taught to this wife and forgotten or not, the prince is aware. How can you do this to your wife? Vile. Yurin regretted her harsh words for a moment, but her pride kept her chin high, eyes locked with the prince's. "What do you want me to do?" the prince asked in defeat, exhausted and yearning for a quiet morning to think clearly. "Fix this. I don't care how," Yurin demanded. "Okay, I will," the prince replied, massaging the bridge of his nose. Having a wife was much harder than he thought. Another sigh escaped him as Yurin left his personal library. Zihan watched his wife leave. Her simple white dress with green embroideries suited her sophisticated face, toning down the heavy and seductive aura around her, but her ruby-colored wedding dress had suited her best. The prince massaged his head, lost in thought about his wife. He had expected her to act as if he didn't exist, based on what people around her, including her personal maid, had said. But today, her firm words felt as if his father were ordering him about something. Even last night, she had treated him like a servant, asking about their wedding gifts and what he wanted. He thought she didn't care about what happened that night, but he was wrong. The realization gave the prince a headache. Marrying into the general's family had not been a good idea after all. The night ended with Yurin alone in their chambers, quietly combing her hair after sipping tea near the balcony. For her, the day had been both overwhelming and boring. She hadn't left the quarters after greeting the Empress and spent her time staring at the grassland visible from the balcony. Yurin missed her old home. The forest view was greener and more adventurous than the grassland, which seemed to mimic ocean waves with the wind. In the forest, she could fade into her true self without anyone saying anything. The grassland felt like the palace, while the forest was her ancestral home. A moment later, the maids entered, washed her feet, and helped her rinse her mouth. She changed into her inner clothes and lay on the mattress. Fortunately, she had the talent of falling asleep easily. Morning came, and Yurin felt cold. Hugging herself inside her quilt, she opened her eyes wide when she realized she had no clothes on. Instinctively, she hugged herself as her maids poured warm water into her tub. A thin white curtain shielded her nakedness from these strangers. A minute later, a maid lifted the curtain and smiled. "Good morning, miss," said Yurin was glad to see you but confused about what had happened. "The prince wanted you to know that he was needed in the main hall, so he left early," Yu said. Yurin's eyes widened. "What did you say?" she asked, immediately getting up and hugging the quilt. "The prince was here? Did he do something to me while I was asleep?" Yurin panicked. "The prince is needed in the main hall, miss." "You, do you realize what you just said?" "Was he here last night?" Yurin demanded. Yu's forehead creased in confusion. Yes, miss. Yurin looked at the bed and saw stains on the fabric. She covered her mouth, horror in her eyes. Is Miss Wu okay? Yu asked, concerned. Quick, help me bathe. I need to talk to the prince, Yurin ordered. Yu's eyes quickly landed on the mattress. The evidence of the previous night's activities was visible, making her cheeks turn red. The Miss of the Wu estate was indeed married now, and it wouldn't be long before a new addition to the family arrived. Yu was glad about this, but was also curious about why her miss was acting strange. Yuren was fuming. Being married into this family felt like a curse. She had been forced last night and couldn't remember a thing, so she needed to find out what had happened. Miss, the prince is still in the main hall. It is unjust to go there without the emperor's summons, said Yu, kneeling before her. The other maids also knelt, pleading with Yuren not to go. Despite only being with her for a short time, they had already learned that the princess could be impulsive when angry. Then I'll just have to wait. Prepare my breakfast. I should store some energy for later, Yuren said. The maids turned pale with fear, while Yu's face flushed, thinking of something else. And I wish to have breakfast inside. I don't want to see the grassland, Yuren added, heading back inside. The maids quickly prepared her breakfast, trying to conceal their trembling hands. They felt guilty about what they'd said behind her back, knowing that if she heard, they could be in trouble. Stop trembling. I won't kill you, Yuren said, causing the maid arranging her table to stiffen. She felt faint, but continued her task, until all the maids were dismissed. The heavens heard what you said to the princess yesterday. Her eyes are now on you, one maid whispered to another, who had spoken ill of Yuren after her argument with the prince. What did she say? Yu asked, holding a book. She eyed the maid from head to toe. The maids quickly fled in fear. Yu watched them with curiosity before entering the room without knocking. Miss, I brought your book, Yu said, showing her the book she had finished before entering the palace. Yuren's face fell. I've already finished that. I wish you'd brought books about seeds, Yuren replied. I'm sorry, miss, but your mother instructed me only to bring books on etiquette, Yu apologized. Yuren sighed and raised her cup to Yu. Taste this peach water. It tastes different from what we drink outside. Yu chuckled but didn't taste the peach juice. Instead, she poured a little more into her master's cup. I've heard the imperial palace has many skilled cooks, she said. Indeed, but nothing beats my mother's food, Yuren agreed, though her eyes grew sad. Yu felt a pang of sadness as well. Don't worry, miss. One day the prince will take you to his palace, and you'll see your family on the way, Yu reassured her, bringing a fleeting smile to Yuren's face. I just hope they aren't the talk of the city after that good-for-nothing. Prince left me on our wedding night, Yuren muttered angrily. But you consummated your marriage last night, my lady, so you don't have to worry, Yu pointed out, causing Yuren to choke on her food. Yu quickly poured her water. Are you okay? Yu, don't mention such things at the table, Yuren admonished after drinking. Apologies. But it's true. Now the physician of the Empress has left because you two have consummated, Yu explained. Yuren's face soured. Just thinking about the act made her insides churn. Now she understood why the queen had sent the woman to them, to confirm if they had consummated their marriage. But why a physician, not a maid? Had she drugged them? Unknowingly, Yuren's face showed her shock. Yu gave her a puzzled look. Miss? She called, and Yuren looked at her with something in her eyes. That morning, Yuren was furious again. Yu tried to calm her down. Back in the general's mansion, her master had been a happy-go-lucky person who rarely got angry. But inside the palace, she seemed to get angry for no reason. That afternoon, Princess Li Wenrui has arrived at the fourth prince's quarters, announced a servant, startling Yuren. She had been reading the book you had brought her when the princess rushed into the hall. "Princess Wenrui," Yuren greeted, bowing as she saw the princess's happy face. She recalled the memory of her hugging her after placing the amber bracelet on her wrist on their wedding day. "Yuren, I apologize for the sudden visit," Wenrui said, immediately taking her arm. "Princess, I'm afraid the fourth prince isn't in the estate," Yuren said as the princess led her to the balcony, where they could see the grassland. "I came here for you," the princess replied, smiling as she sat on the chair. "I am honored, but I'm afraid you might be disappointed." "I'm not the best host," Yuren replied. She had only learned about the princess from others, including the books she read in her spare time. But when she had seen her that day, she had sensed the princess's curiosity about her. She felt wary around her. "You shouldn't say that. Now that you've become a married woman, you're already a much better person than me," Wenrui said, as the maids offered them tea. Wenrui thanked the servant after pouring the tea. It was not clear that the princess was just here for a friendly chat, and the way she treats her servants are too kind. Too kind that it's giving Yuren a different feeling. "I don't think so, princess," she said cautiously. "Call me sister. You are my little sister now," Wenrui insisted, and Yuren hesitated. She knew the royal family had a complex hierarchy, and it was risky to address someone of a higher status too familiarly. "Then, may I ask, why did sister come to see me?" Yuren asked, attempting to change the topic. Wenrui sipped her tea and looked out at the grassland. "I wanted to know more about you, Yuren," she said with a warm smile, but her eyes held a deeper curiosity. Yuren felt a chill. She had heard rumors about Wenrui's sharp intellect and influence within the palace. This visit might not be as innocent as it seemed. But Yuren kept her face calm and pleasant, determined to navigate this conversation carefully. "I've heard a lot about you too, sister," Yuren replied, mirroring the princess's smile. "Your accomplishments and grace are well known throughout the palace." Wenrui chuckled softly. "You're too kind. But tell me, how are you adjusting to life in the palace? I know it can be overwhelming at first." Yuren took a moment to compose her thoughts. "It's certainly different from my life before, but I'm managing," she said, keeping her answer vague. Wenrui nodded, studying her closely. "That's good to hear. And how is your relationship with my brother? I hope he's treating you well." Yuren's heart skipped a beat. She had to be careful with her words. "The prince has been considerate," she said diplomatically, avoiding any direct comments about their strained relationship. Wenrui raised an eyebrow, sensing the tension in Yuren's words, but she didn't press further. Instead, she changed the subject, talking about court politics and the latest palace gossip. Yuren listened politely, but her mind was racing. Wenrui's visit felt like a test, and she couldn't afford to slip up. She had to be cautious, especially with someone as perceptive as the princess. As their conversation continued, Yuren felt the weight of palace life more than ever. She had to play her cards right, or she could easily find herself in a dangerous situation. But for now, she put on her best smile and tried to match Wenrui's charm, determined not to let her guard down. "I am sorry to interrupt, miss, but the fourth prince has arrived," said Wenrui. She immediately stood up and asked one of her maids to clean up. There, they saw the fourth prince, his face as emotionless as ever, entering the hall. Today, he wore a dark blue robe embroidered with black yarn. It was the first time, except for their wedding day, that the prince had worn a different color. The two of them greeted the fourth prince. When he finally stood before them, he looked at Yuren, and her blood suddenly boiled as she recalled what had happened last night. "It's getting dark, fourth sister, fourth brother. I guess it's time for me to go," remarked the princess. Yuren accompanied her to her carriage, and was pulled into a hug before she left. Urine watched as the fourth prince walked back to the estate and was about to follow him when she stumbled over a large stone. Her body was about to hit the ground, but she caught herself with her hands, injuring them. Urine cursed silently. Once she helped herself up, she saw the prince watching her. Her anger flared up again, and she glared at him with fury in her eyes. She knew this prince was no gentleman, but it turned out he was more cruel than she had thought. He could have at least helped his wife up. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Knew you would say that," he replied, walking straight to the estate. Irritated, Urine followed him. The couple went straight to the prince's private library. The first thing he did was read the parchment he was holding. Urine gritted her teeth. "Fourth prince, you must explain yourself. Visiting my room in the middle of the night and forcing yourself on me," she demanded. The prince continued to look at the paper. "I did go to our room at night, but I did not force myself on you." He finally looked at her. "You said I had to do something to quell the rumors, so I made it seem like we consummated our marriage," the fourth prince explained, holding his pen and writing something on the parchment. Urine continued to glare at him with a look that could kill. It was true that there was nothing unusual about her body that morning, but she still felt violated, having been stripped naked. And now, the prince was acting as if he wasn't taking her seriously. "You will give me the farthest quarters, from yours, specifically near the forest. You will never set foot in that place," Urine demanded, referring to the prince's estate. "I'm afraid there are no rooms near the forest." "This discussion is over. I would not dare to be near someone who strips an unconscious lady naked," she said firmly. The fourth prince wanted to chuckle at how fierce this lioness was. "I asked your personal maid to do that. No need to worry," he replied. Urine said nothing more and left the library. The prince secretly followed her movements. This time, his wife wore a pale rose dress and had put on makeup, perhaps because of her sister's visit. But the bloodstains on her dress did not escape the prince's eyes. He remembered that his wife had fallen earlier and almost landed on her face, but she had been quick and agile enough to stop herself with her hands. The prince sighed and called one of his servants. "Go fetch a doctor for your miss." The day Urine had long awaited had finally come. While the servants busily packed and made ready for the long journey, Urine took a walk upon the grassland. She had been in the palace for 3 days and had not taken a closer look at the grassland, so she decided to explore it before they set forth to their estate. After that day, Urine neither saw nor heard from her husband for a full day, and she harbored no complaints. Although she found little amusement in reading books, drinking tea, and feigning interest in palace gossip with the other noble ladies and concubines, she assumed that her life in the fourth prince's palace would be far more tolerable than this. Routine. "Mistress, the wind is cold and the grassland must be muddy. I pray you, remain in the pavilion," Yu called to Urine, who was treading carelessly upon the grass. With every step she took, insects scattered from the blades of grass. "I am well. I do not fall ill easily," Urine replied. Although the spring made the wind blow colder, the warmth of the sun made it less chill than the forest she oft visited beside their household. Urine also observed birds flying in formation across the sky, as well as some rabbits and rats fleeing when their lairs were disturbed by her presence. "You, is there a chance I might hunt some rabbits or ducks for our supper?" Urine inquired, casting her gaze upon the taller grasses farther from the estate. In this area, the grasses were much greener, but also much taller, nearly reaching her shoulders. "Mistress, I beg you, the estate has sufficient meat for a month's suppers. Do not venture into the tall grasses." Occasionally, something stirred in the grass beside her. Her brow furrowed with curiosity, as her delicate, silk-clad arms parted the tall grasses to see what it was. She could not fully clear them, so she bent her body. One moment she was reaching for something, and the next she felt her feet lift from the ground. A strong, warm arm wrapped around her waist and bore her out of the grasses. Is the mistress fond of snakes that she would swim in? Their den? Her husband's cold, manly voice echoed in her ear. He carried her as if she were nothing, with one arm, as though she were a sack of wool. Urin was startled, but she managed to free herself from his grasp as soon as they reached the estate's yard. I apologize. I was merely curious, she said, stepping away from her husband and gazing at him with a calm expression. Urin resolved that since he showed no emotions towards her, she would do the same. Change your attire. We shall visit the Major General's estate before returning home, he commanded, and walked away without so much as a glance at her. Yu hurried to her side, worried. Mistress, your garments are now muddy, Yu said. Urin merely shrugged and went inside. She changed into a dark green robe before entering the carriage. The prince followed shortly after, holding a piece of parchment and reading it as the carriage began to move. Urin pursed her lips and diverted her thoughts by gazing out of the window. The busy, crowded streets of the capital filled her sight. All the people seemed to be in a hurry, walking, eating, and conversing. She could not help but ponder what her life would be like outside this place where she had been raised. True, she had traveled to villages, but they were still near the capital, and all their customs were the same. But this time, it was different. She had been informed that the journey would last nearly 2 days without delay. Urin could not help but sigh and sink into her seat. She covertly glanced at the prince from the corner of her eye. He seemed to be asleep, his eyes closed, and his head resting against the seat, causing her to stare at him openly now. His face was undeniably handsome, yet he remained a mystery to the capital due to his private nature. This prince was always in the shadows, away from the rumors and gossip of the people. Yet Urin knew that within the palace, the truth was quite the opposite. Some members of the council considered him the most dangerous among the siblings, capable of usurping the throne, while others claimed he had no desire for it. The palace maids would always wait for him to walk the halls on the same day of the week at the same time, for it was the only occasion they could glimpse the fourth prince. Yet none truly knew his character. Urin continued to gaze upon his face until his eyes slowly opened. They looked directly at her, and she had no time to avert her gaze. Her only reaction was to widen her eyes. Fourth Master, we have arrived. Urin did not even notice the carriage come to a halt. He promptly straightened his posture and stepped out. Urin, on the other hand, felt as though the temperature had risen inside the carriage, causing her cheeks to redden. She felt a flush of embarrassment for having stared at him for too long. Standing before the Wu mansion were the carriages, gifted especially for the newlyweds. The Wu family, save for Wu Jin, who was training to become a scholar, awaited their arrival in the main hall of the estate. Urin smiled upon seeing the familiar place, the familiar guards, and the knowledge that she would see her parents again, although they were a day behind. "Father, Mother," Urin exclaimed, half running, half walking to reach her parents as they entered the main hall. "Fourth Master," the general greeted when he saw his son-in-law, the only man who would likely be the sole addition to his family. "Major." "General, there is no need for formalities," the fourth prince replied. He greeted them both with a bow, and the good general immediately patted his back. "I am pleased to have you in my home. Please, join us for the noon meal." And so the entire family proceeded to the dining room, which lay opposite the main hall. This room was bustling with maids preparing what appeared to be a feast, a symbol of the warm welcome of this family. "Mother, where is Brother Fang? Your brother studies until nightfall. I fear you shall not see him," her mother said, embracing her side as they entered the dining hall. The family sat beside one another as in days of old. Happiness shone in Urin's eyes, and her movements became confident and carefree. She even found herself smiling at the fourth prince without realizing it. Meanwhile, The men at the table were engrossed in a different discussion. "Child, have you consummated your marriage?" came a whispered question from Yurin's mother. Yurin immediately halted her eating, unsure of how to respond. Wu Ling, her mother, chuckled and gently patted Yurin's back. "Silly child, there is no need to be embarrassed." Yurin simply smiled awkwardly and cast her eyes down upon her plate. "In due time, you shall conceive a child. Always remember all that I have taught you. You shall not see your mother for a very long time." Yurin felt a swirl of emotions at her mother's words. The prospect of becoming a mother herself felt both distant and daunting, but she maintained a composed expression. She understood that as a noblewoman, producing an heir was not merely expected, but practically required. As the conversation flowed around her, Yurin's thoughts returned to her husband, the enigmatic fourth prince. His silence and aloof demeanor made it difficult for her to discern his true nature. She wondered if their marriage would ever grow into something more than a mere formality. After the meal, Yurin spent some time with her mother in the garden, reminiscing about her childhood and the times they had shared. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the estate and making the flowers in the garden glow with vibrant hues, Yurin's heart ached at the thought of leaving her family behind, but she knew that her life now belonged to the fourth prince. That evening, as they prepared to depart, her mother held her in a tight embrace. "Remember, my child, you are strong. You are a Wu, and we are with you always, no matter the distance." Yurin nodded, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. She knew she was strong. She just needed the reminder from her mother. The journey back to the prince's estate was quiet. Yurin kept her thoughts to herself, and the prince remained as unreadable as ever. She was lost in her thoughts when the carriage suddenly came to a halt. "Mistress, we have arrived," Yu said softly, helping Yurin down from the carriage. Grand is an understatement when beholding the estate of the fourth prince. It is vast and spacious, yet its architecture and design are marked by a simplicity that belies its grandeur. The main hall is a majestic space exuding an air of understated nobility. As Yurin steps within, she is met by the sight of lofty, vaulted ceilings, supported by thick, sturdy beams of polished wood. The dark sheen of these beams, etched with the natural grain of the wood, attest to the estate's dedication to simplicity and authenticity. The floors are of large, smooth stone tiles, cool to the touch, with a subtle, earthy hue that harmonizes with the wooden elements. The walls, though grand in scale, are unadorned, save for occasional scrolls of calligraphy or simple landscape paintings, each framed in dark wood and carefully selected to reflect the natural beauty surrounding the estate. This estate is undoubtedly far grander than Yurin's ancestral home, perhaps even grander than that of the wealthiest merchant. Yet why? The only resident is the fourth prince, who, it is said, refuses to take any concubines. "The maids shall lead you to your quarters. I have matters to attend to." Yurin felt a shiver run down her spine. The prince had spoken again without her knowing he was so near. So close that when she moved, her back brushed against his chest. She took a small step forward. Yes. You may go," Yurin replied with a slight stutter. She turned away, following the maids as the prince departed. The young maid led her to her quarters in the southern wing. The hallways leading from the main hall were spacious, lined with wooden pillars, each adorned with minimalistic carvings. Yurin could not help but be in awe. "This estate is vast, my lady. The fourth prince must be planning to have dozens of children," Yu whispered in jest, causing a frown to crease Yurin's brow. "More likely he is planning to take many concubines," Yurin whispered back, her tone almost defensive. The most distant quarter in the southern wing was designated as her chamber. It was spacious, yet the walls and ceiling bore none of the designs found in the main hall. Another part of the estate is being prepared for you, my lady. The fourth prince wished to inform you that you may reside here for the time being, a servant said, eyes cast downward. Did you say another part is being built? Urine asked, almost in shock. This chamber was already 3 times more spacious than her quarters in the Wu mansion. Why was there a need for more? Yes, my lady. It is to be built beside the forest and the pond. Urine blinked. She recalled the last time she confronted the prince about their wedding night. She distinctly remembered saying she wished to be as far from him as possible, and that she wished to be near the forest. If you'll excuse us. The maids left the room one by one and then returned with her belongings, yet Urine stood still in the center of the room, bewildered. He remembered that conversation, though she had not meant it in earnest. Though she does indeed love the idea, it was merely something she said to induce guilt in the prince. The fourth prince is truly something. 2 moons have passed, and the new quarters construction is still going, and in that time, Urine has encountered the prince only thrice since her arrival at his estate. The first time, she saw him standing before his guards while she took her morning walk. Their eyes met, but they not talked, and walked past each other. The second time was also during her morning walk, when she saw him walking toward the main hall, a parchment in hand. One of her maids stumbled, causing him to look in their direction. The third time was when she spoke to him about matters concerning the arrival of foodstuffs, a modest renovation of the estate to improve the lighting, and the need for a tailor to provide her with new garments. The prince merely nodded, granting her the permission she sought, as well as the tailor and textiles she desired. Beyond these encounters, they have not met again, or rather, he has not seen her again. Yet the madame, as the maids now call her, habitually takes her morning walks around the palace, traversing the same paths at the same time when the prince sometimes enters the main hall. The maids say nothing, but they secretly resent the madame for this. They are forced to rise early and endure the long walks that tire them, save for Urine's personal maid from her former home. Yu always smiles, watching her lady as the fourth prince again enters the main hall. The mysterious aura never leaves this man, even in the early morning, as he strides into the hall, followed by his men and guards, while Urine, lost in her own thoughts, watches the birds she almost wishes to. Hunt Yu cannot help but sigh. This couple truly dwells in their own worlds. Yet after tonight, a week after her arrival in her new quarters, events may take a different turn. A letter arrived, causing her lady much distress and anger. Nosy servants, Urine muttered through gritted teeth. She crumpled the letter from her mother and rose with a sudden vehemence. The letter read of her mother's concern, asking if all was well. With 2 moons past, Urine had thought herself free from the prying eyes and sharp tongues of those in the capital, but she was wrong. This estate is no different. She could punish her maids for leaking gossip that reached her family in the capital, but to what end? As in the palace, gossip is a force that cannot be quelled. You, bring me my dowry chest from my room. Urine scattered her dresses, choosing something uncharacteristic of her usual demeanor. She ordered her maid to stay and assist her as she changed, into a white hanfu that deepened into red as it flowed down, embroidered with crimson patterns resembling scattered rose petals. She bade Yu to apply her makeup and style her hair. As she gazed into the mirror, Urine's expression hardened, her eyes like daggers. Yu could not help but wonder what was written in that letter to provoke such a transformation in her lady, as did the other maids, who were stunned by the sultry beauty that emerged as the door opened. It was as if the madam had transformed into another being entirely, the fourth prince's quarters. Urine walked toward the prince's chambers, some of her maids trailing behind her. She instructed the guards to remain silent as she approached the prince's room. When she opened the door, she expected to find the prince already abed, but the lamps were still lit, and his desk was placed beside his bed. May I know as to why? The princess has intruded my quarters at this late hour? Urin's heart nearly stopped as she heard the prince's voice from behind her. How did you... You startled me, Urin blurted out, her hand over her heart. The prince regarded her with his usual expression. He was already dressed in his inner garments, ready for sleep, though his face did not seem to reflect it. Perhaps he thought her presence was that of an assassin or a thief. May I know the reason for your presence here? The prince asked, his gaze sweeping over her form from head to toe. Urin immediately felt exposed in her sultry, thin attire. Urin cleared her throat and stepped back slightly. A letter from my mother... She cleared her throat again. I received a letter from my mother, expressing concern that our marital business is not proceeding as it should. Rumors has reached the capital, and likely this village as well, that we do not conduct ourselves as a wedded couple ought. Urin clenched her fist and sighed. I wanted to sleep here tonight, she declared, as though the matter was already decided. Silence filled the room as the prince stood there, merely staring at her. I know what you are thinking. To you, this may seem a trivial matter, but for a woman of noble birth, we are expected to uphold certain standards set by society, she continued, pursing her lips. The prince sighed softly and walked towards her. Urin stepped back, about to offer further explanation, but he merely walked past her and lay down upon his bed, massaging the bridge of his nose. Go ahead. Make yourself comfortable, he murmured, his voice and expression betraying his exhaustion and drowsiness. Moments later, the prince opened his eyes and looked at his wife. I thought you wished to sleep here. Why do you not lie down? You wish your wife to sleep on the floor? I do not. Then rise and allow me to sleep, Urin interrupted. The prince stared at the ceiling, then exhaled heavily before getting up. A small smile played on Urin's lips as she lay down on his bed. She stretched out her arms, yawned, and then nestled into his quilt. And, just as she always had, Urin fell asleep almost immediately. The prince's library. Urin was awakened by sunlight gently kissing her closed eyelids and warming her face. As she opened her eyes, an unfamiliar ceiling greeted her, accompanied by the faint aroma of porridge wafting from somewhere nearby. Her brows furrowed as she sat up, scanning the room. The prince was nowhere to be seen. Only his used garments hung in the laundry, the sole evidence of his presence. Rubbing her eyes and stifling a yawn, Urin rose from the black sheets of the prince's bed. The dark furnishings of the room, combined with the black bedding, stood in sharp contrast to the light wood used for the ceiling and walls. She hadn't noticed this the night before, so consumed by fatigue and anger that she had simply wished to collapse into sleep. One thought occupied her mind amidst these unfamiliar surroundings. The room felt and smelled distinctly like him. A strange stirring arose within her, as though this place were the den of a beast. After straightening her clothes and combing her hair with her fingers, Urin opened the door. Her maids were already waiting outside, and without a word, she began her walk back to her quarters. After a bath and preparing herself, nearly drifting to sleep, Urin made her way to the prince's library. Guards stood at the gate and at the doors of the library. After her arrival was announced, she found the prince writing something on a parchment, not even glancing in her direction. Speak. His voice was colder than usual, but Urin remained unfazed. Fourth brother, you must stay in my quarters tonight. Rumors will not die in a single evening, she said. Yet the prince continued to write, eyes fixed on the parchment. His indifference began to irritate her. He simply nodded and turned the page of another book, fueling her frustration. Urin gritted her teeth, feeling her blood rise with indignation. Is there anything else you require? The prince asked, still, absorbed in his reading. I want another tailor. I do not care for the garments the previous one fashioned. She did not truly need another tailor, but she hoped the request might provoke a response. It did not. Very well. I will arrange it. You are impossibly stubborn, Yurin muttered under her breath, hoping for some reaction. Indeed, I am stubborn, he replied, still without looking up. Defeated, Yurin glared at him and left the library, in frustration. As night fell, Yurin requested her maids prepare her bath while she dined. Her morning had been spent practicing embroidery under the watchful eye of the governess, while the afternoon saw her wandering the forest with her personal maids. Madam, your bath is ready, Yu announced. Yurin nodded, instructing them to ready a thin red inner dress and braid her hair. Yu, could you apply a light touch of makeup? She asked, noticing the maids discreetly preparing the table for her evening tea in the corner. Yurin smiled inwardly. They seemed to have understood her intent from her many instructions. Once submerged in the bath, careful to keep her face and hair dry, she dismissed her maids. Later, after drying off and donning the thin clothes prepared for her, Yurin left the bath to change, only to find someone already present in her quarters. Her heart nearly leaped from her chest in shock. The fourth prince was there, standing silently, neither knocking nor announcing his arrival. You startled me, Yurin exclaimed, her breath slowly steadying. The prince, however, wore a peculiar expression. Surprise, certainly, but something else lingered in his gaze. His eyes lingered on her face, then traveled down the length of her body. Feeling his gaze, Yurin instinctively crossed her arms over her chest, where the fabric only concealing nearly half of it. Do not look at me like that, she said sharply. This is merely part of the act, as if I were seducing you. She turned swiftly to her wardrobe, her hands trembling as she searched for suitable attire, still sensing his eyes upon her. When she finally found something to wear, she cast him a sharp look, only to see his gaze now on her chest, then to her legs. In the safety of the bathroom, Yurin let out a heavy sigh, quickly changing into her regular clothes. She unbraided her hair and wiped off the makeup. Yet when she stepped out, she found the prince watching her still, this time with a predatory gleam in his eyes, sipping the tea prepared for him. She shot him a glare, silently imagining the thoughts swirling in his mind. She had not anticipated this reaction. She had assumed he had little interest in such matters. This was not part of the plan. I said, "Do not look at me," she snapped. And finally the prince averted his eyes and returned to his tea. Yurin scoffed, tossing a comforter and pillow to the ground. She lay down, pulling the covers over her head. For the first time in a long while, Yurin, who usually fell asleep with ease, found herself wide awake that night. The maids and guards were ordered to keep their distance, at least 5 meters, from the princess's chambers. As the maids left Yurin to retire to their own quarters, the prince was already making his way toward her room, opposite from them. They all bowed, but the prince paid them no heed. Once out of sight, the maids exchanged glances, clearly thinking the same thing. Most of Yurin's maids hailed from the palace or her ancestral home, but those from the estate knew the prince despised physical contact. They were certain the couple had not consummated their marriage yet, despite rumors to the contrary. Even on the night Yurin had spent in the prince's quarters, there had been no sound, no sign of anything happening between them. It was the talk of the estate, as well as among neighboring households. Yet tonight felt different to those who knew the prince's cold demeanor. Their madam had made great effort to seduce him, wearing even more daring clothes than the night before, braiding her hair and bathing in scented herbs meant to enhance her allure. "Why are you so worried?" one maid whispered to Yu, though the others overheard. "I fear for my mistress being held by the prince," Yu replied, her face pale with concern. The older maids exchanged glances once more. It was true. Though their madam was strong and taller than most women, she was but a small rabbit in the presence of the prince. Would their madam succeed in her attempt to seduce the prince? Yurin, who usually found sleep easily, had been awake for nearly half the night, disturbed by the presence in her chamber. In truth, it was hardly better to sleep in her own quarters than in the prince's. When morning came, Urin awoke late and found the floor empty where the prince had lain. She also missed her customary morning walk because of it. Rising later than usual, she was only then approached by the maids. "Shall we proceed with your embroidery practice today, madam?" the governess inquired, as Urin took her breakfast. Knowing what had transpired the night before, the old servant likely suspected that her mistress was weary. Urin shook her head, though she still wished to practice. Her hands, though not entirely suited for such delicate work, could yet be refined through effort. That morning was spent in the tedium of embroidery, her fingers pricked by needles again and again, but with patience she finally achieved some measure of success, aided by the guidance of her maids. Though Urin was skilled in the 4 classical arts calligraphy, chess, music, and painting, her true mastery lay only in painting. From childhood, she had sought to excel in many endeavors, only to tire of them after a time. Archery and swordplay were her true passions, practiced since her youth, long before her marriage into the royal family. But it had been 3 months since she had touched a bow or sword. Now she needed another pursuit to fill the void. Embroidery, a refined art form and a favored pastime among the ladies of the palace, seemed the proper avenue for Urin. She reasoned that mastering its intricacies would soften her hands, accustomed, as they were to the handling of arrows and blades. When noon approached, Urin sent a letter to the prince, expressing her thanks and assuring him that they need not share a chamber again. Along with the letter, she sent a basket of lychees, unable to shake the guilt of making a prince sleep upon the floor. Next time, she vowed, she would arrange proper bedding. Yet, she strove to put the events of the previous night out of her mind, though her thoughts strayed there often enough to make her wish she could strike her head against the wall. His gaze, the way he had looked at her, kept flashing in her mind. "You, fetch me the new robes from the tailor," Urin commanded, referring to the garments the prince had ordered made for her. Her mother had sent over a collection of clothes from her ancestral home, none of which included the more practical, masculine attire Urin preferred. Thus, she had persuaded her husband to hire a tailor. She smiled as she examined the dark red and deep blue robes. For her afternoon walk in the forest, she chose the blue robe and sturdy boots, taking with her some of her maids and one of the bows from the prince's stock. "Who will accompany me to the forest?" Urin asked, as one of the maids styled her hair into a high ponytail. The maids exchanged uncertain glances but said nothing. In the end, 2 guards from her small estate joined her, watching as she wandered through the woods, examining plants and shooting arrows at nothing in particular. By dusk, they returned to the estate, having caught 2 birds of prey. As night fell and Urin had finished her evening meal, she retired to her chambers. The maids left her with a stack of books, and as she flipped through their pages, she frowned. "What?" she mumbled, glancing at the titles. Most of the books were about the marital duties of husbands and wives or matters of childbirth. Tossing the book aside as if it were a plague, Urin sighed and lay down beneath her quilt. Moments later, a maid announced the prince's arrival. Urin immediately sat up, her eyes wide, as the door to her chamber opened, revealing the prince, dressed in his home attire, hands behind his back, his gaze fixed upon her, her brow furrowed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure under his intense stare. "To sleep," he replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I sent you a message earlier. The rumors have died down. There is no need for us to sleep in the same room," Urin said, noticing the dark circles beneath his eyes and the weariness in his expression. "Perhaps I forgot to read it," he replied. He must have been so burdened with duties that he had overlooked it. Guilt pricked at Urin. 2 nights now, a prince, accustomed to the comforts of his own bed, had slept upon the floor. He had surely been deprived of proper rest. "I am too weary to return to my chambers. May I not sleep here?" he asked directly, his exhaustion evident. Urin was relieved that he spoke plainly. Of course. She tossed him a pillow and blanket before turning away, hoping not to trouble him further. But after a moment, she could not resist asking. "Your Highness?" she called softly. No response. Peeking over, she saw him lying down with his eyes closed. "Are you not needed at the border?" she ventured. He grunted. Would it not be easier to remain at the border rather than travel back and forth? "You need me here," came his reply, so simple yet startling. "I do not," she protested immediately. A silence fell between them. But Urin, restless, could not leave well enough alone. "Your Highness? Is the floor not too hard? Are you uncomfortable?" she asked, staring at the ceiling. "I am okay sleeping on the floor," he answered, his voice deep with tiredness. "My bed is large enough." "You may sleep here," Urin offered, guilt gnawing at her. "I would not wish you to sleep on the floor," the prince said. "I will not," Urin assured him. The silence stretched on once more, broken only by the sounds of the night outside. At last, the prince rose from the floor. Urin, still staring at the ceiling, felt his presence close as he loomed over her. She made room for him, turning her back to him. She heard the rustle of the blanket as he settled beside her, and just when she thought sleep might finally come, she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist, pulling her close until her back met his chest. Urin's eyes flew open. She squirmed, free from his grasp, and hissed, "What are you doing? Do you wish to sleep on the floor again?" The prince, eyes closed, lay motionless, though there was a faint smile upon his lips. Her heart raced at the sight of it. The Empress's banquet. When Urin awoke that morning, the space beside her was already vacant. She promptly rang the bell, and all her maids came to attend her, cleaning and helping her prepare for the day. The stud. "Prince was summoned to the palace today, madam," one of her maids informed her. Urin merely nodded and donned her usual robe to take her breakfast in the pavilion by the pond, then proceeded with her day. The following days brought a change in routine. The breeze from the forest grew colder as autumn entered the calendar, and the storage room was being refurbished in preparation for winter's approach. As the days passed, Urin found herself spending her afternoons with tea and books from the Kao estate's main library. Living within the prince's estate softened her hands. Her hair had grown longer, always braided and tied up, and her wardrobe now consisted of lighter-colored garments and silk fabrics. 2 days after the prince last spent the night at her chambers, 2 new hanfus were delivered to her, along with hair ornaments from the prince. A week later, another jade-colored gown arrived, accompanied by 2 new maids. The hanfu was more exquisite and elegant than the others, and the maids mentioned they specialized in caring for children and women with child. It had been more than a week since the prince last visited her quarters. The last time he had spent the night was 9 days prior. However, on the day the hanfus were delivered, the prince appeared in the afternoon. Urin was promptly alerted and hurried to greet her husband the moment she saw him enter her chambers. "Urin greets the 4th master," she said, bowing with a book clutched to her chest. "Let us take our noon meal together," the prince replied. As Urin straightened and saw his face, her brow furrowed. "Why the sudden invitation?" she asked. "I have matters to discuss with you." Urin simply nodded and instructed the servants to prepare the meal in the dining hall. Once the meal was set, the 2 were seated across from each other. As soon as the maids finished their tasks, they departed, leaving the couple to eat in silence. "Other dresses and new maids. I have no need of them," Urin said. "The garments and maids were gifts from the general's family," the prince said casually. "You went to my ancestral home?" "I met the general at the palace, and he extended an invitation to his estate," the prince replied, casting Urin a brief glance before continuing to eat. "What did you say to him?" Urin demanded. The The prince gave her another look, but remained silent. It was at this moment that Yurin felt the desire to throttle him. "What is it? What did the two of you speak about?" "The borders," he answered curtly, though Yurin continued to eye him. "And what of the borders?" she asked quickly. But he gave no response, merely continuing his meal. "Well, may I at least visit them one of these days?" she asked, her eyes almost gleaming with hope. The prince seemed to freeze, his chopsticks hovering in mid-air as he stared at her. "Yes?" Yurin nodded slowly, as if tempting him to agree, but the prince cleared his throat and replied, "There will be a banquet for the Empress's birthday, just before the Mid-Autumn Festival. They should be present then." Yurin's eyes brightened at the prospect of seeing her family once again. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of one of the prince's soldiers. The prince excused himself from Yurin with his food half finished and his tea untouched. Yurin watched him depart, her thoughts wandering. Seeing him after 9 days, she could not help but ponder what had changed about him. Something had indeed changed. Perhaps it was his manner of speaking softer, more deliberate. Perhaps it was the novelty of him initiating a meal with her. Or, maybe, it was the faint smile that lingered upon his lips. Perhaps he had gone mad, Yurin mused. The banquet. The current empress, descended from 2 of the most influential families in the capital, hosted one of the grandest and most extravagant banquets each year. Her penchant for lavishness had been well known since her days as a noble lady, and upon her marriage into the royal family, her birthday celebrations seemed to rival even the Mid-Autumn Festival in grandeur. Li Zihan's mother and the Empress hailed from the same region in the colder part of the Middle Kingdom, yet they had not crossed paths until both were married into the royal family. Though the Empress and Zihan's mother were from different branches of the family, both fathers having held ministerial positions, the Empress was quickly elevated to her station due to her intelligence and talents, while Zihan's mother had been more content with her love of plants and herbs. That was what the Empress admired about her cousin Zihan's mother. Her mind was so consumed with her own passions that she had no interest in the throne. Her beauty was renowned, yet she seemed unaware of how to wield it. This was partly why the Empress had taken Zihan under her care after her cousin's death. She believed Zihan, like her mother, had no desire for power or the throne. Seated upon the golden throne, positioned high above the banquet hall, the Empress could see nearly every face in attendance. As her family and the princes greeted her with the utmost respect and lavish gifts, she smiled graciously, waving as they offered their tributes. The Empress was in good spirits, until she noticed a murmur rippling through the crowd as 2 figures entered through the grand gates. A young woman clad in a jade-colored gown, almost white, embroidered with green patterns, her hair half tied with simple yet elegant ornaments. She was lovely, to be sure, but not remarkable. Walking just behind her, wearing his customary black robes, was the 4th prince, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched his wife closely. There were many others present, both before and behind them, but from the Empress's vantage point, these 2 seemed ordinary. She could not fathom why the crowd's attention was fixed upon them and not on her. The Empress felt a prick of irritation rise within her. It was nearing the celebration when the 4th Master and Yurin arrived at the palace. After refreshing themselves and changing into their formal attire, they made their way into the grand hall. The royal family and the nobles she had met at her wedding were all present, and Yurin greeted them with polite nods, though her mind was already absorbed by the grandeur surrounding her. Unknowingly, she wandered into the banquet alone, her eyes roving across the splendor that unfolded before her. This was her first time attending a royal banquet within the palace walls, and she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the hall. The ceilings were adorned with intricate patterns and painted scenes, the warmth of the atmosphere standing in stark contrast to the chill of the season. Yurin kept her expression neutral, concealing her awe beneath a composed exterior. It wasn't long before she realized she was standing alone. Her gaze swept across the room, and to her quiet irritation, she found the fourth prince walking a few paces behind her, watching her intently. How could he have allowed her to walk unescorted before so many nobles? She slowed her pace deliberately, waiting for him to match her stride. But before she knew it, they had arrived before the emperor and empress. Surprised, though careful not to show it, Yurin felt a firm hand settle on her waist. The presence of her husband beside her steadied her as they both bowed in unison before the royal couple. Yurin bit her lower lip, awaiting the emperor's acknowledgement. "Rise, children," the emperor intoned. Yurin lifted her head and met the empress's gaze. The empress was studying her closely, her eyes sweeping over Yurin's face. Her hair, her attire, and then back to her face again, as though searching for something. "The fourth prince and his wife offer their greetings to your majesties, and wish the empress long life on her auspicious birthday," the prince declared in a smooth, measured tone. Yurin could feel the prince's grip tighten ever so slightly, drawing her nearer. She remained silent, her throat tight under the empress's scrutinizing gaze. "Please accept this humble gift from our household," the prince continued. At his signal, a large chest was brought before the emperor and empress, filled with rare fruits and herbs from the southern lands, treasures from regions where the leaders were known as sultans. The emperor nodded, his expression unreadable. "We thank you for the generous gift," he said simply, dismissing them with a subtle wave. The empress, too, acknowledged them with a nod, but did not look their way again. Yurin followed her husband away from the royal dais, unease prickling at the back of her mind. The empress had not seemed pleased. "Fourth master," she whispered as they walked, her voice barely audible. "Have I displeased the empress?" The prince cast a brief glance her way but said nothing, continuing to lead her toward their seats. "I fear I have upset her," Yurin murmured, as they settled into their chairs. Tea was swiftly brought to them, though she barely noticed it. "You have offended no one," the prince replied, his voice calm and dismissive. But his assurance did little to comfort her. Yurin discreetly scanned the room, noting the frequent glances cast in their direction. "Everyone seems to be watching us," she whispered again, her hand lightly tugging at the sleeve of his robe to draw his ear closer. "It is their usual behavior," he remarked nonchalantly, sipping his tea. "I doubt it," Yurin countered, her gaze lingering on him. "Of all the princes, it seems they watch you the most." A faint smile tugged at the corners of the prince's lips before disappearing again. "Perhaps it is you they find so captivating," he replied, casting a sidelong glance at her. Yurin raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "I think not. It is your rare presence that commands their attention." "I am always present," he said, his tone still light. "Perhaps you have only now begun to notice me after the emperor's banquet." Yurin's eyes widened slightly. "You knew I was looking at you that day?" Instead of saying something, a smile lingered at the prince's lips. Enchanting was the word on everyone's lips as they beheld the couple from the Jiangnan. Wu Yuren, daughter of the esteemed general and subject of many rumors, stood resplendent, in a jade-hued robe, adorned with subtle gold patterns, her hair braided and tied with meticulous care. Beside her, her husband, though handsome, wore an air of restlessness, as if eager to depart from the feast. Yurin walked ahead of her husband, but her stride was interrupted when they came before the emperor and empress. All eyes watched as the fourth prince's hand gently found its place at his wife's back, the two bowing in honor of the imperial couple. "It is true," whispered one of the guests, eyes lingering on the pair. "They seem like any other couple, nothing more, nothing less." Perhaps the rumors of their coldness were merely that rumors. "Indeed," another added. "The contrast is fitting a cold prince and the fierce daughter of a general." As the night wore on, the feast grew more spirited, the clamor of voices rising with each passing performance. Dancers from noble families entertained, one after another, until the most famed among them took the stage, their movements graceful as they concluded the evening's spectacles. Yurin excused herself from the gathering, seeking a moment of solitude in the palace corridors. Familiar faces greeted her in passing, though she exchanged words with only one. "How are you, my sister-in-law?" came the voice of Princess Wenrui, who stood nearby, clad in a cherry-colored hanfu. Her playful tone betrayed no seriousness, yet it was clear she awaited someone in the hallway. "Your Highness?" Yurin responded with a bow. "I am well." "The rumors seem to have misled us all. You appear quite at ease with my brother, the fourth prince," Wenrui remarked with a curious smile, her words laced with hidden meaning. "If you will excuse me, Your Highness, I must attend to other matters." Yurin moved to pass, but Wenrui's hand gripped her arm, firm and unyielding. "In a month's time," Wenrui whispered, her voice low and urgent, "my brother will take a concubine from the family of the Emperor's advisor. You must prevent this." Yurin felt the weight of those words, her body momentarily freezing. Wenrui's grip tightened. "They aim to use her to sway the fourth prince, to turn him against the crown prince. You must stop her," she insisted. At that moment, a group of 3 noble ladies appeared at the end of the hall, their bright robes adorned with intricate gold and silver patterns, their wealth evident in every detail. The lady in the rose-colored hanfu was first to notice them, her gaze lingering on Yurin with unsettling intensity. The group approached, bowing their heads in respect. "First Princess Wenrui, third Princess Wu Yurin," they greeted in unison. Wenrui's demeanor shifted instantly, her voice turning sweet and gracious. "Have you been enjoying yourselves?" she asked, her smile wide, though Yurin could sense the falseness behind it. The lady in the rose-colored hanfu continued to study her closely. "This is my sister-in-law, Wu Yurin, the wife of the fourth prince," Wenrui introduced. Her arm hooked around Yurin's, as if in a show of camaraderie. Yurin greeted them politely, though the smiles exchanged between them felt hollow, their gazes filled with scrutiny. "Sister-in-law must depart now," Wenrui said, her tone light, yet her words rang strangely. "The fourth prince will grow anxious if she does not return soon." The comment left Yurin uneasy, yet she managed a small smile and excused herself. Her mind raced, replaying the princess's warning. The implications were clear danger loomed, and someone sought to pit the fourth prince against his brother. When Yurin returned to her seat, her thoughts were consumed by Wenrui's words. Though she tried to focus on the performances, she couldn't shake the ominous feeling. The fourth prince, ever impatient, signaled his desire to leave early as he often did. Though Yurin was liking seeing many people, she knew her husband well by now. The dark aura that surrounded him when displeased was unmistakable. Thus, she agreed to leave. Before dawn, they had already begun their journey, after spending the night at her ancestral home. The morning had greeted them with a grand breakfast prepared by her mother and father, and they lingered for some time before setting off. Seated at the back of the carriage, wrapped in her fur coat and absorbed in her thoughts, Yurin found herself revisiting the events of the night before. Wenrui's final words echoed in her mind. Prevent her. But who was this her? Yurin had no desire to meddle in her husband's affairs, least of all his taking of a concubine. The sound of the carriage door opening snapped her from her reverie. Her husband stepped in, a small brown box in his hand. "From Wenrui's estate," he said curtly, handing it to her before seating himself across from her. "You and the princess seem to have gotten along well," he remarked, his gaze dropping to the box. Yurin pursed her lips and accepted it, carefully opening the lid to reveal a length of purple silk. "We spoke of clothing, mostly," she replied, showing him the fabric. You have an interest in clothing? He asked, his tone curious. I have developed one since moving to your estate, she answered, referring to the famed silk trade of his region. Yet when Rui gave you silk when Suzhou is known for it? He questioned, his gaze piercing. Yuren hesitated but maintained her composure. Perhaps she wished to offer me something before our departure, as a gesture of goodwill. Her husband studied her for a moment, then asked, What else do you like? Yuren blinked, caught off guard. Me? She repeated, unsure how to respond. Embroidery? She ventured. And books? He added. And books, she agreed, her heart steadying. And hunting? He inquired further. Yuren frowned. How did you know? I merely guessed, he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. You seem to pay me much. Attention, fourth master, she said, narrowing her eyes. And yet, I did not know you had such an interest in fabrics, he responded with amusement, though his tone soon turned serious. What did the princess say to you? His gaze became cold, causing a chill to run down Yuren's spine. She gripped the box tightly, feeling cornered. Why should I tell you? She replied, feigning irritation. The prince remained silent, his eyes locked onto hers. Yuren held her ground, her expression unwavering. Finally, it was he who looked away first. Inform me if something goes awry, he said, his voice softer as he leaned back, closing his eyes. Yuren let out a slow breath, settling the box on her lap as the carriage continued its journey. Something is wrong between the prince and the princess. Yuren was not sure. Winter had settled firmly over the fourth prince's estate, a quiet mantle of cold enveloping the grounds. Yuren, though now the mistress of the household, still had much to learn. The head maid, accustomed to long-standing traditions, disapproved of most of Yuren's decision, her discontent thinly veiled. Yet Yuren, though not fond of patience, had learned to endure. She had become an astute observer, silently learning, adapting. The fourth prince had been called to the borders and the council, returning only for brief weekly visits when they would share a quiet midday meal. But as the year drew to a close, his duties kept him at the palace for nearly 2 weeks, leaving the estate colder still in his absence. It was in the 3rd week of that month when an unfamiliar carriage arrived at the household. Madam, called. You, her voice edged with urgency. Yuren hastened to the main hall, where the doors swung open to reveal a young woman. Draped in fine furs over a resplendent hanfu, her features were delicate, yet her gaze was sharp. A pleasant noon, madam. I am Rong Hua from the Empress's household. I come to speak with the fourth prince. Yuren's heart sank. Wen Rui's warning echoed in her mind. Rong Hua, the same lady from the banquet who had watched her so intently and greeted her along with Princess Wen Rui, had come. This lady could be taken by the fourth prince to be his concubine. I regret to inform you the prince is not at home, Yuren said coolly. Rong Hua smiled, sweet and untroubled. How unfortunate to travel so far and miss him, she replied, her words laden with false politeness. Inside her chambers, Yu wrung her hands in worry, pacing as Yuren sat by the fire. Madam, what shall we do? Yu's voice trembled with panic. Yuren, deep in thought, hugged her fur coat closer. What can I do? Yuren's tone was calm, almost resigned. The prince's choices are his own. How can he do this to you? Yu's eyes glistened, with unshed tears, while Yuren, remembering Wen Rui's words, stared into the flickering flames. It is tradition, Yu. I have not lost my place, nor my title, Yuren replied gently, though the heaviness in her heart betrayed her. I'll prepare some tea, Yu offered, reaching for the teapot adorned with purple markings, purple, the same color as the fabric Wen Rui had given her. The fabric. Fetch me the brown box in my wardrobe, Yurin instructed. When Yu returned, Yurin opened the box, her fingers brushing the fine silk before a folded parchment slipped out, a letter from the princess. The following morning, Yurin found herself seated across from Ronghua at breakfast. The girl's demeanor was soft, her voice as sweet as her appearance was delicate. I must say, this estate is far milder than the north, Ronghua remarked with a gentle laugh. Have you been to the northern provinces, madam? I have not, Yurin replied, her voice measured. It is far colder there and the heights unbearable. I much prefer the temperate lands of Suzhou. Ronghua's smile seemed innocent enough, yet her words pricked at Yurin's composure. This place is more peaceful than most, the lady added. Yurin found herself nodding in agreement. Suzhou was indeed a haven compared to the bustling capital, a place where life unfolded quietly, far removed from the court's endless machinations. It is peaceful, Yurin answered, though her mind wandered to the letter and the unspoken threats that now loomed over her. Deep within, Yurin had grown to love this estate. It was not the home of her birth, but it had become a place of solace. But now, everything felt fragile, as if Ronghua's presence alone could shatter the quiet peace she had built. The cold had settled deeper into the season. The estate bustled with preparations as the horses were fed and stables warmed, yet the fourth prince remained absent, burdened with matters at the palace. It had been nearly 2 months since the failed attempt on the crown prince's life, and whispers of treachery echoed through the court. The emperor's suspicions grew, and Zihan, the fourth prince, was called to oversee royal duties. When Zihan finally returned to the estate, he found a carriage already at the gates. He entered with little fanfare, though the face that greeted him was not the one he had hoped to see. Madam, the fourth master has arrived, announced one of the maids. Yurin set down her cup and hurried to the mirror, touching up her appearance. She added another layer of rouge to her lips, though her hands trembled with frustration. She had chosen a red hanfu and a white fur coat, yet now, standing before the glass, she felt she had tried too hard. Yurin paused, staring at her reflection. Her efforts seemed futile, and a surge of irritation swept through her. She wiped the rouge from her lips, undid her carefully arranged hair, and changed into a simpler white robe. By the time the prince had arrived, Yurin had chosen not to greet him. She waited until nightfall before gathering her courage, wrapping herself in her coat, and heading to his chambers. Madam, the prince is bathing, a maid informed her. But Yurin continued on, dismissing the attendants at the door. Instead, she quietly handed them her coat and lamp. She knocked softly before entering. Zihan was reclining in the steaming bath, his eyes closed, his arms resting on the edges of the pool. At the sound of the door, he opened his eyes, his expression unreadable. Another rumor, perhaps, he said, his voice low and amused. Yurin did not respond and bit her lower lip. She slipped off her shoes and stepped into the water, letting her robes soak as she approached him. The warmth of the bath did little to ease the tension coiled inside her. It is warm, she murmured, her voice almost trembling. Her long undone, hair scattered in the waters, and almost half of her upper body is now soaked. Zihan chuckled, though his gaze remained distant. Do you realize the danger for you to be here? He asked, his tone casual, though he swam closer to her. Yurin took a step back, her heart racing. I am not afraid, she said, opposite of what she just did. The prince just chuckled and stopped getting closer to her, finally done teasing her. Where were you earlier? I did not see you on my arrival? He asked. Some emotion flashed on his eyes. Every week on his arrival, it became a habit that the first he sees once he entered the main hall is Yurin doing her usual lessons, but today, I was cold. I do not want to leave my estate. The fourth prince just stared at her, towering her already tall frame. "Tonight is much colder, princess, and yet you're here in my chamber," he said, moving his face closer to her as if waiting for her to say that she was lying. Urien stepped back until her back touched the edge of the pool, and his arms trapped her from both sides. Her plans backfired. It was much harder to do that, she thought. The night was silent, and the only thing to hear is the blow of the cold wind outside. But for Urien, it was her heart beating as if it wanted to escape her body. They were staring at each other until he broke off when she did not say anything anymore. "Good night, princess," he said, moving to leave the water. But Urien caught his arm, her grip firm. "Please stay," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a soft, hesitant kiss. Zihan pulled back for a moment, studying her with an unreadable expression, then smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "You never cease to surprise me," he murmured. A loud gasp escaped in Urien's lips when he seized her waist and was drawn in closer to his warm body. She was placed her on his lap until their faces were almost even. A big smirk became visible to his face when he placed her hand on his shoulder before his lips claimed hers in a deeper, more passionate kiss. To Urien, the leaves have yet to fall, yet the winds have already carried whispers of what is to come. Not long ago, within the palace walls, I chanced upon a conversation I was not meant to hear. It is said that someone wants to get rid of the crown prince, using his brothers that are most trusted by the emperor, and they have set a plan in motion. Another lady is to be given within the fourth prince's estate, a scheme born of suspicion, getting him as their ally against the crown. Following the failed attempt on the crown prince's life, I am named among the suspected conspirators. I cannot talk to no one. No one trust me anymore. I am not your sister, nor am I your friend. Yet we share a common cause, the well-being of the empire and the future of the dragon throne. I hope this letter finds you, though my hands are tied until I have had a word with my brothers. Gone was the gentle prince who once catered to her every desire. In his place was a man consumed by possessiveness, as though a dam had burst, releasing a flood of repressed yearning. His touch, once tender, had become urgent, his every caress laden with an almost unbearable intensity. Urien trembled beneath him, her body weak from exhaustion. They had been together for hours, and each time she protested, he merely held her, closer, his voice rough with desire. "You belong to me," he whispered, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin of her neck, marking her with each kiss, each bite. No escape. Words escaped from him between heavy breathing, as his mouth trailed lower, leaving evidence of his claim upon her. Her protests were feeble, her voice faltering as she pushed against his chest, but his hands quickly captured hers, pinning them with ease. She felt overwhelmed by the force of his presence, by the sheer intensity of his need. "Say my name," he commanded, his voice low but unyielding. "Zihan," she cried out, her body trembling with a sensation she could no longer resist. Her hands, finally freed, pressed against his chest once more, but he did not relent. She was helpless against the onslaught of his desire, her own body betraying her as it responded to his touch. "Do not hold back your cries," he murmured against her skin, his breath hot against her ear as he shifted her trembling legs, one draped over his shoulder. Urien's eyes widened in surprise, her heart racing as he held her there, his eyes dark, with satisfaction. "You will not leave this chamber," he vowed, his voice possessive and final. She could do nothing but moan softly, her voice broken by exhaustion and surrender. Tears slipped from her eyes as she buried her face against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the storm he had unleashed. The hours passed in a blur of sensation, her body feeling as though it had been pushed to its limits and beyond. And still, he did not stop. When at last he relented, he cradled her close, his lips brushing over her forehead in a rare moment of tenderness. Yurin, too tired to speak, closed her eyes as he held her. "Rest for now," he whispered, his voice softer than before, though the hunger still lingered beneath the surface. He kissed her gently, as if to soothe the storm he had stirred within her. But Yurin knew, even in the haze of exhaustion, that this was only a temporary reprieve. The morning light crept into Prince's chambers, but Yurin hardly felt its warmth. Lying in his dark-colored bed, her body was now clothed, her skin cleansed, but exhaustion clung to her like a heavy shroud. The source of her fatigue sat before her, his lips curled into a faint smile as he watched her with a quiet intensity. His gaze was unwavering, predatory. She could not meet his eyes for long, not after what had transpired the night before. Her limbs ached, as though she had been made to bear a great weight. Every movement was an effort. But Yurin forced herself to rise from the bed. "I need food," she murmured, the realization dawning that she had not eaten since the previous day. The prince, ever watchful, set a small table before her, laden with an assortment of dishes. His smile persisted, though the hunger in his eyes remained a different kind of hunger, sharp and unrelenting. Yurin wondered briefly, is this what it means to make a child? The books she had read before their marriage had not prepared her for the reality of it. The man also looks okay and satisfied. How is he okay and her barely walking? "Finish all of this," he commanded, his tone firm but not unkind. "You will need your strength. I shall return shortly." When the prince finally departed, Yurin called for her servants, but no one came. Frowning, she pushed herself to her feet, her body protesting with every step. She made her way to the door of the chambers, finding the hallways eerily empty. Even the guards were absent. A chill ran through her as she wondered where everyone had gone. But before she could dwell on the matter, the gate opened, revealing the prince returning from his errand. Hurriedly, Yurin returned to her seat and resumed her meal. He joined her, sitting across the table, his eyes never leaving her as she ate. Once she had finished, he informed her that a warm bath awaited her. She nodded silently, and when she entered the bathhouse, her maids were already there, pouring hot water into the tub. Yurin stepped into the bath, allowing the warm water to envelop her aching body. Her exhaustion was the only thing in her mind, and dismissed the worry that servants might see the marks of the prince all over her body. It's a good thing that they just worked quietly, their hands gentle as they helped her wash. The warmth lulled her into a deep slumber, and she slipped into sleep once more. When she awoke, the sky darkened. Night had fallen, and the prince was nowhere to be found. Her servants were busy arranging her evening meal, their eyes cast downward as they went, about their tasks in silence. Yurin's gaze lingered on them, but none dared meet her eyes. All she could do was eat what had been laid before her. "The prince were summoned in the palace again, madam," Yu said. "He went here to earlier but decided not to wake you," she added, pouring her tea. "And Ronghua?" Yurin asked. "She is currently staying in one of the guest chambers," she answered, making Yurin worry. "Ronghua is still inside this estate with her, and already talked to the prince. If he has declined her, then why stay?" Yurin thought that after giving herself to him last night, he would send the lady back to the capital. That had been her plan, yet the morning brought an unexpected result. The lady was still here. Many candles flickered upon the table, casting their warm glow on the afternoon meal set for two. The sky was laden with heavy clouds, the air outside cold, with the wind howling through the estate. The hearth had been lit for days, combating the unrelenting chill. Yurin and Ronghua sat across from each other, sharing the meal in quiet company. "Have you spoken with the fourth master?" Yurin inquired softly, her curiosity thinly veiled. Hama smiled gently and nodded, We have spoken, yes. If it pleases you, might I remain for a while longer? The weather is harsh, and I fear it may grow more dangerous, she replied. Yurin returned the smile with a small one of her own, but felt a deep curiosity stir within her, wondering what exactly they had discussed. Have you been well, madam? You seem a bit unwell. The weather can be cruel, and you must take care of yourself. While the prince is away, Ronghua added, her voice gentle. Instinctively, Yurin's hand moved to touch her cheek. She rarely wore makeup, and today was no exception, yet no one had ever remarked that she looked ill. The comment caused a wave of self-consciousness to wash over her. She glanced at Ronghua, who was adorned in a resplendent blue hanfu, her hair meticulously braided. Yurin, in contrast, wore a plain white robe with her hair loosely gathered in a simple bun. Suddenly, she recalled the events of last night. Maybe the plan to seduce the prince was enough, yet she herself was not. Perhaps he desired a more beautiful wife. Madam? Yurin was brought back to reality as Ronghua called her name. Oh, I am well, thank you, Yurin replied, offering no more than those words. The fourth prince is quite unique, but when it comes to women, he is like any other man, Ronghua said, her tone light but pointed. Yurin's chopsticks froze in midair, startled by the woman's boldness. Oh, forgive me if I spoke too plainly. I merely wish for us to grow comfortable with one another, Ronghua continued, her eyes gleaming. Are you even qualified to speak such words? Yurin could not help but retort. Yet Ronghua only chuckled softly. I mean no harm, madam. I merely offer advice. I have been close to His Highness since we were children, Ronghua said, and Yurin felt something twist bitterly within her. He may seem serious, but he favors women who are unlike himself, those who are bright, like a graceful lotus blooming in calm waters. Yurin listened intently. If that were indeed true, then she was surely not one of those women. We grew up together. I know him well. The words pierced Yurin's composure, and she laid down her chopsticks with deliberate care, signaling that she was done with the meal. Yurin noticed the brief flicker of surprise that crossed Ronghua's face, but she only smiled, a mocking, knowing smile. Excuse me, I must rest. The prince quite exhausted me last night, she said, her tone deceptively sweet, before rising and leaving the dining hall without sparing a further glance at her guest. 2 days passed, and although Yurin longed to wander the estate, the guards refused to let her leave, and her maids were of no assistance. Ronghua remained in the guest chamber, and while they continued to share quiet meals, Yurin's gaze could not meet hers after the sharp exchange between them. This silence, however, filled Yurin with a certain satisfaction. Another day came, and Yurin found herself reading peacefully after supper when the announcement of the prince's return reached her. He entered her quarters without permission, snatching her book and flinging it aside. Startled, Yurin's initial surprise quickly gave way to irritation. I did not say you could sleep here, she stammered, nervously glancing up at him. Who said we will sleep? He grinned, his lips capturing hers in an instant. His tongue delved into her mouth, his hands moving swiftly to her waist, and then lower, with one slipping to her femininity. Her eyes widened at the speed of his touch, and soon her body responded with a warm gush, betraying her confusion and apprehension. She moaned softly as she felt one of his fingers slip inside her. So tight, he murmured, as she weakly tried to still his hand, only for him to pin her hand above her head. Zihan, she whispered, her voice trembling. I want to taste you, he replied, lowering himself. He parted her thighs, and she was immediately overwhelmed by a sensation unknown to her as his mouth met her most intimate place. Zihan. Ah. She clung to his hair, her eyes meeting his. His gaze never left her, watching every quiver, every gasp, every expression she made as he continued. Pleasure built steadily within her, her body tightening until she finally released. Her legs grew weak, yet still, he continued, unrelenting. His eyes remained fixed upon her. "Please." "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She tried to pull herself away, but he held her firmly, sliding 2 fingers inside her once more. She could do nothing but moan again, clutching at the pillows, the bed, anything within reach, as the sensation overwhelmed her once more. He smiled, seeing her exhausted, and leaned down to kiss her again, his lips trailing marks along her inner thighs. Slowly he untied her hanfu, leaving it draped across her body, revealing her shoulders and chest, as he positioned himself over her. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his voice low. She opened her eyes at his words, watching as he took one of her nipples into his mouth, causing her to blush deeply and turn her head in embarrassment. "Zihan, be gentle," she pleaded. He paused, gazing into her eyes before she pulled him down for a quick kiss. The prince chuckled softly. "I can make no promises, my princess, but I'll try," he said. At first, his movements were slow and deliberate, his kisses trailing down her neck and over her breasts, while each thrust was powerful and deep. Despite the measured pace, she cried out with each plunge. Only after she reached her peak did he finally pause, still deep within her, resting his head against her neck as he breathed in her scent. "You belong to me," he murmured. Her eyes widened when he lifted her trembling legs over his shoulder. "Zizihan," she gasped as he thrust into her once more. "Stop," she begged, her voice lost in the sound of his body moving against hers. Each thrust sent waves of sensation through her body, her legs shaking as he pounded into her, deeper and deeper. Though she wished to surrender fully, it was too much for her to bear, and her body trembled uncontrollably beneath him. The night passed with her cries filling the room, until she could no longer endure and fell into a deep sleep. Morning came, and her ladies attended her as usual. Her face flushed red with embarrassment as she beheld the state of the room, the aftermath of the night's passions. They helped her rise and bathe, though they undoubtedly saw the marks he had left on her skin. "Where is the prince?" she asked quietly. "He is dining with Lady Ronghua, madam," one of the maids answered. Yurin closed her eyes, a mix of weariness and bitterness swirling within her. "Shall we ready you to join them, madam?" one of the ladies asked. Yurin said nothing. A heaviness settled in her chest, the bitter taste of betrayal coating her tongue. She dismissed the maid with a wave, her lips pressed into a thin line. Inside, her thoughts whirled like the violent storm that had passed through the estate mere days before. She had given herself to him, body and soul, and yet, there he was, entertaining another woman while the marks of his passion still clung to her skin. "Do I mean so little?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The question lingered in the cold air of her chamber. For a moment she considered going to them, storming into the hall where they dined, and kill the two of them with her favorite sword, figuratively. But she knew better than to act rashly. Such an outburst would only disgrace her further, not just before the prince, but in the eyes of everyone in the estate. Instead, she reached for her hanfu, a deep crimson, robe embroidered with golden flowers, carefully chosen to enhance her presence. If she was to face the prince, it would not be as a woman scorned, but as the lady of this estate, the one who held his favor above all others. Yurin traveled the main dining hall with haste. The prince and Ronghua looked up in unison as Yurin crossed the threshold. She kept her expression neutral, though her heart thundered in her chest. Inclining her head slightly, she flicked her gaze between the two. "Fourth Master, Lady Ronghua," she greeted, her voice steady. "I see the morning finds you both in good spirits." Ronghua smiled serenely, her hands delicately folded in her lap. Indeed, madam. His Highness and I were merely reminiscing about our shared childhood. Yuren's eyes shifted to the prince, who sat casually as if this were the most natural occurrence in the world. His gaze lingered on her face, then drifted down her body, as though appraising her. Yuren cleared her throat, breaking the silence. I trust your meal was satisfying, she continued, her tone polite but distant. The prince raised an eyebrow, detecting the subtle tension in her words. Join us. I thought you might still be tired, so I ordered not to wake you, he replied smoothly. Yuren's lips curved into a cold smile. I would not wish to intrude upon such familiar company. At this, the prince's face hardened. You never intrude, he said, his voice softening, as though trying to placate her. Yuren met his gaze, her heart aching beneath the composed exterior she had fought to maintain. Did he truly believe a few gentle words would erase the sting of what she had witnessed? She turned her attention to Ronghua, who remained poised and elegant, seemingly untouched by the turmoil brewing inside Yuren. The sight of her stirred a quiet, simmering rage within a feeling Yuren was still reluctant to fully acknowledge. Taking a quiet breath, Yuren straightened, her eyes hardening. With resolve, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to other matters, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and exited, her heart heavy with unspoken words. Once inside her chamber, Yuren collapsed onto the bed, covering her face with her hands. Her body trembled for a moment before she abruptly sat up, clutching her head. Have I gone mad? She thought. Why am I hurting as though I care for him? She repeated it to herself. I do not love him. I'm doing this for the sake of my family. But no matter how many times she said it, the ache in her chest remained. The silence of the room pressed in around her, amplifying her confusion. Her thoughts swirled. Why? If she didn't love him, did seeing him with Ronghua feel like a betrayal? One way or another, she knew she had to rid herself of Ronghua. But whether it was for the throne or for something deeper, Yuren could no longer tell. The morning after Yuren was in the courtyard, wielding a sword stick and dressed in a fighting garb, when one of the maids informed her of the prince's arrival. She merely nodded and continued her training. Though her strength had returned, there remained a slight ache between her legs, a lingering reminder of what he had done. She gritted her teeth, her movements sharp and focused, until she sensed a presence at her side. Quite the attire, princess. Will you join me for the noon meal? Came the prince's voice, a teasing lilt to his words. She spun, realizing he had drawn closer without her noticing, and stepped back. No, I am not hungry, she replied curtly, turning away from him. He said nothing, yet did not leave her side. Why are you still here? Do you not have matters to attend to? She demanded, her irritation growing. You are the matter I wish to attend to, he replied smoothly. She blushed, her composure faltering. Since they've shared a bed together, this prince has undoubtedly become really clingy and would not stick his nose to everything that she does. No more, she snapped, pointing her sword stick at him. The prince merely smiled, his gaze unflinching. I wish to visit my parents before the new year, she said, her tone firm. You may. Now will you join me? He answered with, and stepped closer to her and inhaling her scent from her neck. Stop that. You're insufferable, she huffed. Stop what? I wish to take my meal alone. I do not wish to see your face, she muttered before turning away from him. As you wish, he responded, unbothered. With that, she left him standing there. That afternoon, as the prince rode off to the borders, leaving the estate shrouded in quiet, Yurin found solace in the stillness. She wandered the halls aimlessly, her thoughts still preoccupied with the earlier conversation between her and the prince. But it wasn't long before a whispers caught her ear. Pausing just behind a pillar, she heard the familiar voice of the headmaid, speaking in hushed tones. With Ronghua, curiosity overpowered Yurin when she heard the fourth prince name. "It's true. She was brought here for a momentary stability," the headmaid whispered. "The fourth prince needs her support if he's to gain favor, but it's not love that binds him. You, Lady Ronghua, are the one who holds his heart." Yurin's breath caught in her throat. Every word was a dagger, piercing deeper than the last. But what about their relationship? Ronghua's voice was light, almost indifferent. "They don't share a bed often," the headmaid continued. "That's why there hasn't been a child. He can get rid of her easily if it pleases him. She's a means to an end, nothing more." A cold wave swept over Yurin, her hands trembling at her sides. A means to an end. She had always suspected that her position was precarious, but hearing it confirmed like this, from the mouths of those within her own home, was unbearable. In so, the end, the fourth prince and Ronghua are bound by fate. The fourth prince who subtly secures favor, and the lady who shall seize upon it to govern the realm. There is no need to hinder the lady, for there is none to hinder. That is why she remained, and he allowed it. Realizing this, Yurin's fury bubbled within her, stronger than anything she had ever felt. Without thinking, Yurin turned on her heel, her vision blurring with anger. She couldn't stay. Not here. Not in a place where her worth was reduced to nothing more than a pawn in a political game, where the prince she had given her heart to cherished another. "I don't love him," Yurin told herself bitterly, trying to hold on to the reason for her resolve. Yet every time she chants those words inside her, it feels like she's betraying herself. Her feet carried her swiftly out of the estate and toward the forest at the edge of the grounds. The cold wind kissed her cheeks, but she didn't care. She needed space. She needed to be free of the suffocating weight that pressed down on her with every step she took within the walls of the estate. The howling wind echoed in the branches above, and the ground beneath her feet was uneven and damp. She had no clear destination, but her emotions drove her forward, heedless of the cold. Hours passed, and Yurin's fury gave way to exhaustion. The chill in the air deepened, and a soft drizzle began to fall. Not long after she stumbled upon a cave. Its dark mouth offered shelter from the cruel weather. She entered while shivering, huddling in the shadows as the wind lashed the world outside. Her body ached with fatigue, and her mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. "Is this all I am?" she wondered bitterly, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the cold. A tool for the royals, a pawn in a larger game, a shadow compared to her? The cave was quiet, save for the steady patter of rain and the distant howling of the wind. For a time, she let the weight of her exhaustion pull her into a sleep, mourning. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and cold, but bearable. Yurin, still groggy from the night in the cave, stood slowly, stretching her stiff limbs. She glanced toward the entrance, noting the faint glow of sunlight. With a deep breath, she gathered her strength and began to make her way back to the estate. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight that awaited her. As she emerged from the forest, Yurin froze, her heart skipping a beat. The estate grounds were bustling with activity, and there, at the forefront, was the fourth prince himself, flanked by his soldiers and attendants. His face was tight with worry, his eyes scanning the tree line, searching. Yurin blinked, stunned. Her presence caught the eye of one of the guards, who immediately alerted the prince. His gaze snapped to her, relief flooding his expression. Without a word, he strode toward her, the soldiers parting to allow him passage. "Yurin!" he breathed, his voice low and tense, but filled with unmistakable concern and anger. Come to think of it, it is one of the rare times she heard her name from his lips. "Where have you been?" The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming, and for a moment, Yurin found herself unable to speak. He stood before her, his armor glinting in the morning light. And for the first time, she saw the depth of his emotions, the worry, the fear, the anger that he had nearly lost her. She began, her voice weak from the cold. "I needed to be alone." Alone? His brows furrowed, and without warning he reached for her, pulling her close. The warmth of his body contrasted sharply with the cold that clung to her skin. "Do you know how dangerous it was? You could have been lost in the storm." Yurin stiffened in his arms, the anger from the night before still simmering within her. She pushed against his chest, her voice trembling with fury. "What does it matter to you? I'm just here because you needed the Emperor's favor, aren't I? For your stability, then you'll get rid of me after." The prince froze, his grip loosening as he stepped back to look at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It doesn't matter." Yurin's voice wavered, but her anger held firm. "You love her, don't you?" "Ronghua, I heard it all. You'll get rid of me to marry her." The silence that followed was suffocating. The prince's jaw clenched, his gaze darkening, but instead of answering, he stepped forward and cupped her face gently. "Yurin," he said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You are wrong." Her heart twisted painfully in her chest as she stared up at him, searching his eyes for answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "Come back inside," he continued, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "We will talk, but not here." For a moment, Yurin hesitated. She had been ready to flee, ready to leave behind everything she had known. But the look in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, made her pause. Reluctantly, she nodded, allowing herself to be led back to the estate. But the questions remained, swirling in her mind. Would she ever truly know where she stood in his heart? Yurin was too occupied to notice the disarray throughout her estate. Curtains hung loose, vases lay shattered, and belongings were strewn about as if a band of thieves had ransacked the place. Yet that was unlikely, for the prince's guards surrounded, the grounds having searched tirelessly for her since night had fallen. Outside, relief spread among the prince's men upon seeing their mistress alive and unharmed, save for a few scratches. Last night had been treacherous. Darkness and danger compelled them to search in groups to guard against any misfortune. Their relief, however, did little to ease the worry of the maids within the estate. As Yurin entered, dismissing their attempts to aid her, she was draped in the prince's cloak, but still, she appeared chilled to the bone. The servants observed her, hair unkempt and sullied, clad in her worn outdoor attire, with a wound on her arm she stubbornly ignored. Her face was ashen, worn, and devoid of the spirit they had always known. They had never seen her so broken, yet pity, not shock, filled their hearts. Something had indeed gone amiss between their masters, and they had an inkling of whom to blame. At the main hall's entrance stood Lady Ronghua and the head maid. Although her expression held concern, those nearby could sense her intent. As Yurin crossed the threshold into the hall, her face an unreadable mask, she was suddenly lifted into the prince's arms. "You're weary," he murmured, holding her close. She looked at him, her gaze empty, but she made no protest. The prince carried her to a chamber within his own estate, a mere distance from hers. Setting her down gently, he wrapped her in another blanket and called for a warm bath to be prepared. "Where did you go?" he asked, clasping her hand between both of his, only for her to pull away swiftly. "It does not matter," she replied coldly. "It does concern me. You were gone. It was near dusk before the maids came to tell me, he replied, his tone laden with worry. Yurin hugged herself, the reason for her departure still raw in her mind. She faltered, at a loss for words. Pain lingered, an ache rekindled by his closeness, and what she deemed to be mere pretense of concern. It's okay. I'll let you rest now. He placed a gentle hand on her cheek, brushing his lips against her forehead. Yurin felt only numbness, her heart torn, knowing that whatever affection he displayed now was but an illusion. She ached to hate him, yet yearned for him to stay. Conflicting feelings swelled within her, loathing and longing, and with each moment, her heart ached all the more. "Madam, your bath is ready." "Madam?" the maid Yu exclaimed, her face paling as she saw Yurin weeping. The servants halted in their tasks, staring in silence. "Leave," Yurin managed through her tears. They exchanged glances, then withdrew quietly, the sound of her sobs echoing through the room. Outside, the maids and guards stood in somber silence, their hearts heavy with sorrow for the once stalwart warrior, who now seemed so fragile. They dispersed only after her sobs faded, and the prince re-entered the chamber. When he entered, he found her asleep, her cheeks tear-streaked, her hair unkempt, her face bearing the weight of sorrow. She had not even cleansed herself before succumbing to sleep. The sight pierced his heart, and he wondered what had cast such a shadow over their union. Removing the blankets cocooned around her, he lay beside her and gathered her close, seeking comfort in her warmth. In that moment, he resolved to mend whatever was broken, for since the day she stepped into his estate, he had wished for it to feel like her home as well. He had granted her every desire. He gave her the freedom to decorate the estate, an extension of her own quarters by the pond, every comfort she could ask for. Yet when she had asked for the estate's expansion, he had felt a twinge of disquiet. "You do not love me," Yurin murmured in her sleep, stirring in his arms. "I do love you," he whispered in her ear, holding her tighter. Indeed, he loved her, even before she had known his name, even before that fateful encounter at the Emperor's banquet. This prince, once indifferent to matters of the heart, had felt his life altered the day he saw her wielding a sword with grace and strength. When they were a child, then when his father proposed marriage to the general's daughter, he had agreed without a moment's hesitation. Since their wedding, he had done his utmost to show her kindness, to ease her into conversation, to grant her desires. Whatever she requested: new clothes, visits to her family, alterations to the estate. He had always said, yes. All she ever had to do was ask, and yet, that night, she had fled. He could not understand what he had done to drive her away. With the onset of the storm, he had summoned all his guards from the borders, searching frantically for her through the fog and rain, pressing on despite the driving winds. He had never known such fear, not since the loss of his mother. For years, he had cared only for her. Yurin awoke to the warmth of his embrace, feeling the gentleness of his touch as he ran his fingers through her hair. For a moment, she leaned into the comfort until she realized who held her. Her eyes flew open, and she stiffened, noticing her clothes were clean, her body bathed. "Rest," he murmured, holding her close. Did you change my clothes?" she asked, feeling a flush of indignation. He responded, drawing her closer and inhaling the scent of her freshly washed hair. "Do not smell my hair," she protested, pulling away. "I bathed you," he said, unfazed by her reaction. "You were half asleep when I brought you here." She now realized they were in his chamber. He resumed running his fingers through her hair, placing a tender kiss at her neck. "Zihan." She struggled in his hold, but he only laughed softly, pulling her even closer. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice almost pleading. Yurin sighed, attempting to break free, but his hold remained firm. "You are impossibly stubborn," she muttered. "I am stubborn," he agreed, unyielding. "Then let's get divorced," she declared, only for his embrace to tighten. "No," he replied firmly, his first refusal. "There is no sense in our being together," she insisted. "I cannot live without you," he murmured, and she froze. "I wish to return home," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "This is your home." "No, with my parents." "Then we shall live to your ancestral home." "I wish to go alone," she said quietly. His grip loosened, a silence settling between them. "What must I do to make you stay?" he asked, his voice raw. She felt the pain in his words. "Would you like a new tailor? A new estate? A new maid? Tell me, and it is yours," he implored. She closed her eyes, holding her silence. "Do you love me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His arms tightened around her, his face buried in her neck. "You cannot imagine how much. I would do anything to make you stay," he whispered, his words filling her with warmth even as tears fell from her eyes. "Ever since I first saw you, before my mother passed, I did not care about anyone," he confessed, his voice reverent. "I visited your estate often when I was in a class with your cousin. I was there. I was always watching you train with your father when you were a kid, and even greet us every time your gaze touches us, but you never looked my way. Until last year, at the Emperor's banquet," he continued, remembering her bright gaze and confident smile. "I was blessed the day we wed. I know not what good I have done to deserve you," he whispered, and she wept silently against his chest, her heart both aching and filled with joy. You loved me all this time?" she asked through her tears, and he only held her tighter, caressing her back until she fell into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, Yurin stirred from slumber, still enveloped in his arms. Her gaze drifted to a white box beneath his books, something familiar about it. Carefully, she reached for it, and as she opened the box, she saw the hairpin gifted to her by the 7th prince upon her marriage, a token that had vanished the night after. Her heart skipped as she realized he had hidden it. "Yurin," he called, his voice still heavy with sleep as she held up the box. "You kept this from me?" she said, holding the hairpin before him. He met her gaze, his expression impassive. "You were jealous of your own brother?" she teased, a smile lighting her face. Though he said nothing, his silence betrayed him. That morning, the room filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the night's tears. In that moment, Yurin knew the truth of his heart. The blood dripped from Wu Xin's trembling hands as he knelt amidst the smoldering ruins of the general's estate. The once majestic courtyard had become a desolate graveyard, the air heavy with the stench of smoke and death. Before him lay Yurin, his beloved cousin, her sword arm limp and lifeless, her face pale yet strangely serene, as though merely in slumber. Beside her, Fang, his younger brother in arms, was as still as stone, his defiant spirit extinguished in the chaos. Xin had arrived too late. The 5th Prince Yurin's husband had drawn the general's family into his treachery. The rebellion was doomed from the start, yet Yurin, loyal and proud to the end, had been sacrificed as a pawn in the prince's desperate schemes. Forbidden to wield her sword and trapped in gilded walls, her fire had been slowly extinguished. Xin clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. If only I had acted sooner, he thought bitterly. If only I had stopped her from marrying such a wretched man. He had failed her. The memories played like an unending torment in his mind. Yurin's wedding to the 5th prince, her forced smiles at court, the whispered rumors of mistresses and treason. And finally, the emperor's order for her execution. Xin and Fang had stormed her husband's estate to save her, but they had arrived too late. The guards had been unyielding, and Yuren's lifeless form had greeted them. Now, Xin knelt alone among the ruins, his heart shattered. The general, who had taken him in as a boy, was gone. The family that had given him love and purpose was no more. His tears blurred the scene before him. When the imperial guard seized him and dragged him to the palace for execution, his thoughts were not of vengeance, but of regret. As the blade of the executioner rose, his final prayer was a desperate plea. "Grant me another chance. Let me protect her." Xin awoke to the sound of bird song and the faint scent of plum blossoms drifting on the breeze. The weight of sunlight fell upon his face, stirring him from sleep. Poke. A small but sharp finger jabbed his cheek. "Minge, father summons you to the study," a stern yet childish voice declared. Shin's eyes fluttered open, and he blinked at the sight before him. A young girl with fiery eyes and an impatient expression loomed over him. His breath caught in his throat. "May," he whispered. Yuren frowned, tilting her head. "Who else, Minge? Are you unwell?" His heart swelled with an indescribable warmth. Yuren, alive and full of spirit, stood before him, a child of 7, untouched by the sorrow that would one day claim her. He sat up abruptly and touched his own face, his hands trembling. The reflection in the bronze mirror confirmed his suspicion. He was once again a boy of 9, newly adopted by the general's family. The gods had granted his prayer. Yuren's annoyed voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Minge, why are you staring at yourself like a fool? Come, father awaits." She stomped off, her tiny feet leaving soft echoes behind her. Shin stood frozen, the enormity of his second chance washing over him. He glanced at the open door where Yuren had disappeared, and silently swore to himself, "This time, I will not fail you." The days passed quickly, and Shin devoted himself to training both body and mind. He studied the lessons of court politics, mastered swordsmanship, and observed all who entered the general's estate. His memories of his previous life became a guide, a map of dangers to be avoided and paths to be changed. When Yuren showed an interest in the blade, Shin encouraged her. Despite protests from the elders and whispers among the servants, he taught her techniques he had learned too late in his past life. Yuren thrived under his guidance, her strength and skill blossoming. For the first time, Shin dared to hope. The princes, too, re-entered their lives. The 5th prince, with his charming facade, drew close to Fang, just as he had before. Shin watched him warily, keeping Yuren as far from his influence as possible. One afternoon, Fang approached him with a furrowed brow. "Why does the 4th Prince Li Zihan visit so often?" Shin glanced toward the training grounds, where Zihan stood silently, his gaze fixed on Yuren as she practiced her forms. Shin had not noticed it in his first life, but now the prince's quiet admiration was unmistakable. "He says he borrows books from me," Shin replied smoothly, though his eyes remained on Zihan. The 4th prince was everything the 5th was not: honorable, reserved, and thoughtful. Shin resolved to steer Zihan's interest toward Yuren, but delicately. He knew her impulsive nature too well. If she suspected any interference, she would do the opposite of what was intended. Yet, as the years passed by, the 4th prince stopped visiting. Wushin changed his plans as the 4th prince was out of the picture, but the opportunity came during the emperor's banquet. As the nobles mingled and the court buzzed with intrigue, Zihan approached Shin in the shadows. "I wish to take Yuren as my wife," Zihan said plainly, his voice steady but earnest. Shin regarded him carefully, weighing his words. "If you care for her, then heed my warning. Do not openly seek her hand. Yuren despises being told what to do. Show your worth quietly, and let her choose you of her own accord. Zihan nodded solemnly. I swear, I will never bring shame upon her name or harm her in any way. Shin studied the prince for a long moment before offering a faint smile. Then I will help you, Li Zihan. But remember your oath. That night, as the banquet's music swelled, Shin sat beside Yurin, who looked radiant under the lantern light. You're considering the fourth prince, aren't you? He asked casually, making her jump. Shin! You startled me! She exclaimed, glaring at him. He chuckled, leaning back in his seat. Do not look at the fourth prince. He should be the last on your list of suitors. Shin lied smoothly, a wicked grin hidden behind his calm demeanor. He knew Yurin too well. If pushed away, she would only draw closer. Yurin frowned, her gaze drifting toward Zihan. Where did you hear that? And as her gaze lingered on the fourth prince, Shin allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. This time, Yurin, you will have the life you deserve. From him. The fourth prince. Zihan himself.